The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are our own, or those of our guests, and in no way represent the views of the companies, associations, or organizations that any of us may work for or represent. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they were told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident. You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast that explores the many pathways to an aviation profession, the challenges that a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, a professional airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. Welcome aboard this very special episode of Squawk Ident. This is Flight 89, Remembering 9/11, recorded on the 7th of September, 2021, from the Aviator Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On today's flight, the Squawk Ident crew and I listen in, along with you, to some of our favorite aviators as they recall what it was like 20 years ago when the world first discovered that 4 U.S. commercial airliners were being used as weapons against our nation by a new form of terrorism never before imagined. I first and foremost want to thank all the aviators that took the time to sit down with me over the past few weeks to discuss their first-hand experiences of that tragic day. We had some difficult conversations as they recall the events that poisoned our nation's sense of security. Nearly 3,000 souls lost their lives on 9/11, 4 aircraft were destroyed, and our nation and the aviation industry were forever changed. The inspiration for this special episode of the Squawk Ident podcast came from recent conversations that we each shared, which pointed out that there's a generation of aviators out on the flight line today that are barely 20 years old themselves. Join us as we speak with professional airline pilots as they recall the events that changed their industry, their careers, and their lives forever on that beautiful September morning in 2001. All this and more aboard Flight 89 of the Squawk Ident podcast. Before we begin, let's take a moment to thank Captain Vic Barber for joining us on Flight 88, Managing Expectations. His journey was filled with unique experiences and opportunities that have inspired us here on the show. His involvement with Flagship Detroit and the DC-3 is impressive. Thanks again, Captain Vic. Now that our pre-flight is complete, let's get ready to push off the gate and start those virtual podcast engines. Flight 89 is officially underway. Assisting at the controls today is a superb aviator and Squawk Ident co-host. He is a former international professional racquetball champion, a member of the 9G Club, an A&P and avionics tech, an RC aircraft commander, a boat skipper, a commercial drone operator, and currently an Airbus pilot for Legacy Airlines. The name we use here on the show is an alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. From his mobile studios, from the 3rd floor of the Renaissance Reno Downtown Hotel and Spa in the biggest little city in the world, help us in welcoming our very own Mr. Rob D. Rob, how you doing?
Hey, what's up, Tony? Feeling blessed to be here, man. And I'm very excited for this episode. This is going to be a good one.
Yes, thank you. I am so excited as well. Now, you're joining us from a layer. You've been flying the line now for, 3 weeks since you completed IOE?
Yeah, it's been a few more weeks than that. But yeah, I mean, really, since I've actually held the line, it's been about 3 weeks. So yeah, a couple of weeks of flying under my belt.
Excellent. And are you enjoying the aircraft?
Totally. I'm slowly learning the nuances of Airbus flying and the some of the techniques that are employed on the flight line versus in training to better manage the airplane. It's a handful at sometimes, and other times it's just pretty easy to fly, straightforward.
Yeah.
Just push the button and it happens,
What was the most enlightening portion of operating on the flight line that you didn't know about in training so far?
There really was no big surprises, but the probably the most the thing that gave me the most anxiety flying this airplane is managing its energy on a descent, just not getting behind the airplane and, trying to do everything you can to prevent from being unstable. Because, apparently Legacy Airlines has a high percentage of being unstabilized. So, but then I think the other stat is also that we have a high percentage of go around, so that's good too. But and actually today was a pretty eye-opening experience. The captain I was flying with today has over 18 years of flying the Airbus, so he's very, very seasoned at it. And we were also operating under the call sign Medevac.
Oh,
found out we were transporting two kidneys to Phoenix, so we had priority handling all the way. And when we were with Albuquerque, we got cleared directly to the airport, so that was kind of neat. So basically, we went directly to the outer fix of the ILS of runway 26 in the Phoenix, and we pretty much were given, descend and speed at your discretion, down to the fix. And wow, this captain, we were moving all. I mean, we were doing 320 on the descent. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, are we going to be able to slow down and, 10,000 feet, slow to 250, which, that's no big deal. But then, when you get to that point, I'm like, man, are we going to be able to get down to the, to the final approach fix at a stabilized altitude and airspeed and be able to configure and, be on profile? And I tell you what, up until maybe 30 seconds from level off, I didn't think we were going to be there. And we were just screaming out of the sky, 250 knots. I think we were 250 knots, and then we slowed to like 210. Got us, one notch of flaps out. Put the gear down, got the second one out, and we're still, just coming down to get the, to get the profile. And right at the final approach fix, I mean, we were 180 knots, gear down. I think we were calling for flaps 3. And then, eventually flaps full before landing checklist. And it all came together at the end. But the whole time, here my inexperienced eyes and instinct was like going, oh my God, we're going to have to do S turns and, level off. I mean, if we had a parachute throw out, that would probably help us out a little bit.
Yeah.
But, man. So anyway.
Yeah, those rubber speed brakes work good, man.
That's pretty good. But, yeah, so that was the, probably the biggest thing I've had so far, but I'm sure there's more to come.
Yeah. And for those listeners,
and I did the approach. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, for those listeners that don't realize that when you have just medical supplies or something that is time critical, like organs and whatnot, operations will then file you as a medevac flight, meaning you get priority handling from the moment you push off the gate to the moment you land. And
that's right.
Every second counts. You're a medical ambulance, basically. You're a medical flight.
We departed Des Moines this morning at I think it was 6 or 6:30, and there was quite a few other aircraft departing at the same time. I was gonna say maybe 4 or 5, some regional guys, Delta. And as soon as we checked in with our call sign ready to taxi, you used the medevac call sign. Everybody stopped on the taxiway, and we went right to the runway and cleared for takeoff. As soon as we got off with departure, they're like, all right, clear direct to, a fixed 300 miles away.
Yep.
So it was awesome. It was really neat to have a kind of service. I wish we could get that all the time, especially on the go home leg.
They even hold Southwest, everybody. So
they hold Southwest
just
too.
A heads up.
Yep.
That's funny. That's true.
Well, speaking of holding Southwest, that other voice you heard was our next co-host here. Also joining us to assist the controls is another exceptional aviator and co-host. He is an OSU Pistol Pete loving grad, an ASL linguist, a creator and director of the Aviation Business Information Board on Facebook, a philanthropist, a pilot cadet mentor, a new dad, and a DFW Airbus pilot at Legacy Airlines. Taking a break from unpacking and moving into their new place, their palace of barbecue from somewhere in Roanoke, Texas, please help us in welcoming to the show Mr. Kyle Jensen. Kyle, how you doing?
Doing great, Tony. I'm glad to be back. Taking a break here last couple of weeks between unpacking, painting, projects, you name it. And I'm very excited for this episode. Got a lot of good things coming.
Yeah, and I was excited when you said I got the office set up and the microphone's out, and I was like, "Dang, this guy's got his priorities right." Good job.
I know, Tony. When I came back, I told the wife, I said we need to at least get everything up and running before I come back. So got to give a shout out to the wife for setting up stuff and unpacking while I was gone the last 4 days and getting more things ready. So,
oh wow.
Yeah. So
God bless her, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
She's a workaholic. Yeah, I'm very blessed to be married to her, and between our schedules and the 6-month-old watching the little one about to start crawling, and
oh my God.
Yeah, can't.
Oh, you haven't even started to become busy yet. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I speak from experience.
So we're excited. We're up for the challenge, and can't wait for the opportunity.
Yeah, those were good times. I missed that time. Make sure you baby-proof that house as soon as possible, because anything that's not tied down will either go in a mouth or get pulled off a shelf.
Yes. Yeah, she's already interested in the phone. So like when we have our phones out or any sort of laptop or whatever, she goes straight for the screen. And even on the phone, she'll start hitting. She starts touching the screen, and she can see what happens to the screen when you touch it. So yeah, it's very intriguing.
So sounds like what you're saying is genetically, we have evolved to the point where kids are now pre-programmed genetically to operate these things at 6 months old.
Coming close to it. That's probably good.
Fisher Price has a good little baby's cell phone. It beeps and changes images and stuff.
And just to make it clear, when she's on the phone, it's all kid related. We're not doing they're teaching videos or
Baby Einstein or whatever.
Yep. So
she doesn't have her own Instagram account yet? Come on now.
No, not yet. Maybe at 1 year. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, it's been great. And we love the new house. Had a few hiccups when we first moved in, but things are starting to go the right direction, and excited for the area. Excited what's in store for us. So can't be happier.
Well, we're very happy for you, and congratulations as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And my last week has been busy. We've been going back and forth with text messaging and whatnot to give you guys all an update. Roger really wanted to be here, but as he mentioned in a couple shows ago, that he's getting ready to do quite a bit of flying over across the pond. And as a Part 91 operator, that means filing paperwork and custom forms and now COVID protocols are changing. Yeah, it's a lot of work. So
you know what though, Tony? I'm excited for that, and there's 2 reasons. Because now, if business traveling internationally will start up again, and generally the private jets, I know at other companies, they've been using the airplanes more with a lot of middle and lower class managers because of the airline schedules. And now with the international stuff opening back up, I've talked to a few of my friends that are on bigger corporate airplanes, like Roger's on the Falcon, and they're starting to open up, and that's exciting news for the legacy airline and the rest of the airlines out there. Just everything's moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Amen.
And hopefully everyone will just behave long enough for us to just keep on getting back to a normal state of travel. Well, my last 3 days have been busy. As I mentioned, I had a 3-day trip, and I met day one. I showed up to the airplane, and I met my captain, and just a fascinating, happy person. And we got along immediately, and we started talking about what we were into and our families and the podcast and this episode that I've been looking forward to now for weeks. And he's like, yeah, man. And so he starts telling me about his journey and what he experienced. And I said, come on, man, you got to let me interview you. Are you willing? And he's like, absolutely. So when we got to Las
Cool.
Vegas on that first night, set up a little something. We went to dinner and came back and did a little recording. And we're going to get to see that here at the tail end of this episode. So, thank you very much. It was fantastic talking to our friends here on the show and our friends out on the flight line about their experiences. I know a lot of people that we know and are surrounded around us maybe were in the aviation industry at the time 20 years ago, and some of them weren't. Maybe they were working on their private pilot license or instrument rating like me. And so I was out on the flight line 20 years ago, but on a part 61, part 91, flight school, not on a scheduled airline. So
Right.
the chance to sit and just talk for a few minutes with these fantastic aviators about their experiences, what they went through, how they got stuck out there on the at a hotel for 3 or 4 days, how some of them were in the Air National Guard, standing, feet from their airplane, ready to go, eating MREs, not moving. And we're going to find out some fantastic details about what they went through today. So I'm really excited about this show. And I just want to say thank you to you two gentlemen as well for joining us.
Glad
Right on, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah,
In stereo.
My father that day, he's also with the Legacy. I went back and he has other obligations. That's why we couldn't interview him. But I asked him because I was in intermediate school. Don't want to show off my age, but in intermediate school, and I remember asking him because I got home from school, and my mom said that he went into the office, and and at that age, I knew that. What do you mean? He flies airplanes. He never goes in the office. And he said that the union that day called all the fellow pilots here in he was DFW based, and called all the pilots to come into the APA, the union, to start making phone calls to check in, because back then they didn't have cell phones were new, so everything was still beepers and pagers and you name it. So he was gone for my mom said he left that morning when the first airplane hit, and didn't get home till about 10, 11 o'clock that night, trying to find everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he he wasn't flying, but the pilots that weren't flying were making phone calls and trying to track down everybody.
Yeah.
That's something that I think is common amongst all the guys that I talk to that were in the industry at that time, especially the ones that were working for Legacy. When everything happened and they, eventually landed where they were, where they landed, there wasn't very much communication going on because they didn't have cell phones. Everything was beepers, and you talk to them, and their biggest their most common comment was every planes and people were scattered throughout the whole country, and the company just didn't know where they were, because planes were just told to land anywhere that was suitable.
Yeah.
So, if that runway was long enough, it didn't matter if your airplane didn't go there, or if your company didn't go there, you were going to land.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was the only time.
Cities and towns all over the country.
Yeah, it was the only time in history when something like this happened, where the airspace above the United States and around the world even was empty for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's actually the only time. It has not happened since, at least not to this magnitude. So
then all you heard in the sky, Tony, were the fighters flying over the towns, and orbiting the towns, and the scary moment, because nobody knew what was happening and what town was next, and didn't have all the intel on that. So it was
that was my role in the Air Guard. Was my squadron was an F-16 squadron, so I was a mechanic, and that's what we were doing as a squadron. We were doing the close air support over Tucson and Phoenix. So the only planes you heard flying above were the F-16s at 10,000 feet, just in a huge holding pattern. And every now and then you'd hear one swoop down to intercept somebody, and usually it'd be that that farmer coming in to get supplies or whatever from his ranch out in the middle of Arizona that didn't check the NOTAMs, or just kind of lives under a rock or whatever, and they'd intercept them and get them down on the ground. So that was a weird time.
Yeah. And it's hard to believe that it was 20 years ago. We're coming up later this week. It's 20 years. And I can remember vividly standing there, clutching the TV remote for hours, not knowing what was happening, just in awe of the chaos and the destruction.
So you were in Phoenix at the time, is that right, Tony?
I was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, in Albuquerque. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's what we wanted to focus on. For today's flight, we wanted to reach out to a few experienced aviators that were out on the flight line as working airline pilots, working on September 11th. And we were just so honored to have had the opportunity over the past few weeks to have a few of these conversations. I actually had conversations with 6 inspiring captains currently flying for Legacy Airlines. So much of the industry has changed since that day, and I am very excited to share our conversations with all of you. The first pilot that we have the honor to speak with is no stranger to our podcast. He is an accomplished Legacy Airlines Airbus captain, a retired commander and E2 and ES-3A pilot for the U.S. Navy, and an award-winning USA triathlon team member. He is an SBR Sports Ambassador, an F2C Nutrition Ambassador, and a USA Triathlon Certified Coach. We first introduced Captain Elmore on Flight 50, Captain, Commander, and Team USA. He again graced us by joining me on Flight 73, Leadership, Mentorship, and Being Better. If you have not yet listened to these episodes, I highly encourage you to take a note of them now and check them out after this flight. Join us as we listen in on an interview with a dear friend, Captain Kevin Elmore.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Elmore. I am a captain with Legacy Airline. I've been a captain since December 2016. I fly the Airbus family 320 aircraft. I've been flying with Legacy for since 1999, so 22 years now with Legacy Airline. And I'm just happy to be here today and share my experiences with Tony. He's an awesome host, so I'm looking forward to the podcast.
And thank you for being here. We recently discovered that, or at least I recently came to the realization that there's an entire generation, as you mentioned, the next class of pilots that are currently working their way through the system to someday potentially be an airline pilot or a cargo pilot or whatnot, and they're working their way through their ratings. And they were not born, some of them, 20 years ago, or they were in diapers, and they don't really realize the gravity of what happened on September 11th, 2001. And so I wanted to speak with a few of my favorite captains around the system that were actually flying and were experiencing it not only firsthand as a American citizen, but as an airline pilot. What do you recall of the moment that you first found out about the events that happened on 9/11?
Wow. So huge mixed bag of emotions. So I'll start out with, I was awakened in the morning of 9/11 with a phone call from a fellow naval aviator friend of mine. And he called and said, "Hey, where are you?" And I said, "I'm at home. I just got back from Paris." It was my first trip that I had flown internationally. Prior to that, I was flying 757-6s domestic. I had flown Flight 11. I had flown Flight 77. So I was very familiar, and people that knew me knew that I had was flying those domestic routes. I did a quick 2-week trip to Korea for Navy Reserve work. So that was my first trip back, Paris, LA to Paris. And I got back September 10th. So that morning, my phone rang with my buddy Phil saying, "Where are you?" I said, I'm at home. He goes, "Well, turn on the TV and just let me know how you're doing after you turn on the TV, and we'll chat later." So as I turned on the TV, it was a replay of Flight 11 going into the tower. And I just remember, I still get goosebumps now, sitting there going, "Oh my God." And I didn't know what to think. Like at first I thought just before the plane went into the building, the way they were talking, I thought it was like a small general aviation aircraft. And then when I saw not only the airplane going to the tower, but the American Airlines colors, the livery, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I think I cried. I got angry as I watched the broadcast, and formulated my own opinions. And I was stuck to the TV for the rest of the day as my phone continued to ring, people asking me, "Where are you? How are you doing?" And that was my memory of that moment.
Yeah, and we've all, those of us that were alive at that time, and adults or even teens, and watching it on TV, it absolutely left everyone in awe of what was happening. I think there are moments in our lifetimes that we remember where we were. The first time the man set foot on the moon, that we accomplished that enormous feat. It was a positive event, and those that were alive at the time knew exactly where they were, what they were doing, what they were wearing. Another time was the JFK assassination. The first time we heard that our president had been assassinated in Texas. Martin Luther King assassination. These were pivotal moments in our lives, those of us that were alive at the time. And we'll never forget where we were because it affects us so much. 9/11 is no different. Those terrorist attacks on our soil, the largest terrorist attack to ever happen on U.S. soil, it became very real for a lot of people. It wasn't just some war, some campaign happening somewhere else. This was happening right here.
Right.
And if you didn't live through it, all you can do is learn about it in the history books.
Right.
And it's not the same.
Right. And for me, it was almost personal because I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up not far from downtown, midtown Manhattan, where those towers were. And they were under construction for most of my childhood. So, that's all we talked about as kids. Like, oh man, they're building the tallest 2 buildings in the world, in our hometown. So it was almost like somebody had stolen something. Somebody had damaged something that belonged to me. And that's what I meant when I said it was personal. And probably a lot of the reason I felt the anger and the rage that I felt because of the attacks.
Yeah. And that leads me to my next question. How long did the events of that day go on to affect your family?
Oh, for weeks, months. I mean, I remember, as being prior military, in fact, I was still in the reserve at the time, concerned about being recalled, going over to have to fight and defend our freedom and retaliate for the attacks. So that was a concern. And the other concern was, when were we going to resume our lives, our work? For me, that's interesting too, because I fully expected to return to work with, I don't know if it was just the way I was trained, but it never crossed my mind that I would not return to the cockpit. It was just, I don't know if it's second nature, but I was never concerned about, I guess I was a little concerned about the security, but I knew that my job was going to be to get back in that cockpit and get things back to normal as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the industry before the events of September of 2001 was much different than it is now. And part of that flying, there was a lot more glamour to it. You could walk up to the gate and see your family off at the gate. There was no TSA. There was no bulletproof cockpit door. I mean, the tone of the industry, both at work with your coworkers and, dropping off family at the airport, was completely different. What do you remember of how life was before 9/11?
I remember people being able to come up to the cockpit and say hi, especially like maybe the nervous flyers, come and, knock, the flight attendant would knock it on the door and somebody would peek in and say hi, or just the way we went about business as far as our friends and families that were allowed to fly with us at Legacy. All that changed, the way we had to register them, and basically, I wouldn't say there was no TSA, so to speak. There was security, but it was a lot more lax than it is now. No concerns about bringing a bottle of water. Just little things that change the way things are done today.
Yeah. And what changes have you seen in the industry following the return of the flying after 9/11 that have really been shaped since that event?
One of the biggest ones that came out of the whole ordeal was the introduction of the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program, where you have volunteers allowed to go and get training on a weapon and voluntarily carry a weapon in the cockpit at various airlines. The Air Marshal program changed a little bit. The doors on the cockpit are reinforced Kevlar now. A lot of protocols, security protocols on how flight attendants and pilots interact to lower the capability of anyone penetrating the cockpit door. Those are just some of the things that have changed.
How long did it take for you to get back to flying after 9/11?
I don't remember exactly how long, maybe about 2 weeks, but I do remember the flight very well, like it was yesterday, because I flew with one of my favorite captains at Legacy, and it was an LA Kona trip. And I remember it well because we had a family of 3. It was a gentleman, his wife, and their elderly father that was traveling with them. And it was so odd because one of the flight attendants was uncomfortable with the presence of these 3 individuals. And I think it was because of their Middle Eastern ethnicity. And we ended up having to get the gate agent involved. And as it turns out, the couple and the father had purchased their ticket with cash, and they had no check bags. And it was something that we had to deal with. The captain had to make a decision whether or not he was going to allow this family to fly with us, because the flight attendant was uncomfortable, and he ended up having them booked on having the gate agent accommodate them on a later flight, because we didn't want to inconvenience the rest of the flight, because the flight attendant was uncomfortable and we were trying to accomplish our mission, which was to fly to Kona. So that particular day, we would, obviously never had that problem prior to 9/11, but it was just kind of an indicator on probably, I'm sure, a lot of different carriers, how crews had to deal with now this new threat or this new problem.
Yeah. Well, we suddenly changed the way we look at those around us, and everyone was now suspect.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the other things, that kind of occurred to me was I knew by, watching the media that, there were the attacks, but prior to the attacks, there were people that had infiltrated or had been on these flights, domestic flights, basically watching, taking notes. And so the threat was still pretty existent. And, who's to say that they weren't still doing scouting and plotting for another attack. So it was a very real threat that, like you asked earlier, how long did this affect you? Well, I mean, I think today people still look at people with skepticism. And, they call it profiling, but it's something that is a product of what we experienced. And it's still in the back of everyone's mind that was alive to remember it.
Yeah. And so you have this opportunity now, 20 years later, to give advice to a young aviator that may have not been old enough to realize the significance at the time.
Mm-hmm.
How would you express how important remembering the events of that day are to a young aviator that just wasn't able to comprehend it at the time?
I would say my advice to any aviator would be just, be cognizant of your surroundings. One of the byproducts for me from 9/11 is when I walk up to the gate, and I don't do it as I would say I'm not as meticulous as I was before, but I'd notice people in the gate area, and maybe a little bit more now because of the whole COVID thing and how the passenger conduct has taken a turn for the worse, it seems like. But you do need to pay attention and be cognizant of people in the gate area, the people that are going to get on your airplane and potentially affect your mission of getting from point A to point B. So I would say be cognizant of your surroundings, and also don't be a hero. Your mission is to fly that aircraft from point A to point B. Anything that happens behind that door is not your problem. And I've had the urge to go take a peek back, even post 9/11, from some passenger misconduct issues. But, my captain would look over at me and said, "Don't even think about it. It's not your problem."
Yeah.
So That's the big difference. And I think passengers are more willing now these days to not let something like that happen. So we don't have to worry about that. So I would pass that on to the young aviators too, is let everybody behind the door take care of the problem.
Yeah. And it's a great point that you had as well, that keep your situational awareness going, not just on the flight deck, but beyond. Mm-hmm. Because when you put that uniform on at the beginning of your day, until that uniform comes off, reality is you represent what you do.
Right.
Even if you're, at the hotel or on the van.
Right.
And being aware gives you the tools to be safe.
Right. Right. Yeah. And speaking of putting on the uniform and representing Legacy or any other carrier, it's interesting because passengers are just different these days. I went to a restaurant/bar to order in Orlando, and I just happened to have to go up to the bar to ask the bartender if I could have help placing my to-go order. And there was a couple of passengers, who knows where they were going. And one of them was intoxicated, and the gentleman approached me and said, "Can I buy you a drink?" And my first thought was, is this guy out of his mind? Does he not see me in my uniform getting ready to fly? And then my other instinct was to be, say something to him.
Yeah.
But then I thought, okay, that's not going to come out well.
Right.
So the best thing that I could do in that particular situation or any situation is keep my mouth shut, smile, and walk away.
Yeah. Especially with everybody's movie studio in their pocket.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I tell a lot of my first officers now that I fly with. Keep me off of CNN. Keep me off of out of the news and out of those pocket cameras.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that we, as a country, as a nation, still take time to remember the significance of what happened. I'm honored to be an American. I'm honored to fly with Legacy Airline and represent my airline with pride and dignity. And I think it's important what you're doing and remembering the events of 9/11, because there's a generation now that wasn't present. And so it's nice to be able to pass that baton through history and through our memories.
Well said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony, for having me.
What a fantastic recollection from Captain Elmore about his experiences. What did you guys think?
Well, if I may go first, the thing that stood out, immediately was he said that, he was out on doing some Navy guard stuff or something like that. And so he'd been gone for a couple of weeks. And 2 weeks later, he came and he said that he has flown those routes under those flight numbers, 77 and 11. And I'm like, man, it could have been him. That was the first thing that it could have been him. So, I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, it sure is. And Kyle, I mean, what stood out for you?
Just the wow factor. And I'm sure as we go through all these, I got a little goosebumps talking about it. That day, remember watching the TV just like everybody else and trying to communicate who was in town, who was off, where people were at, and just where we're at today, 20 years ago, on the security of the flying, the way that people buy tickets now. Because back when, that was a red flag on paying one way with cash, no bags, like he was talking about.
Yeah.
And, how does that affect today? Because nobody really pays cash anymore. It's all, credit cards and
Online. Yeah.
Online. It's harder to flag anything today. And security is always going to be an issue, and just trying to keep up with it. So, but we gotta learn from what happened, and got to keep improving, keep proving security measures, and it has affected a lot in the aviation world, no doubt. Being able to go up in the middle of the flight to go see the cockpit and route. I remember seeing that as a kid, and
no more.
You can't even do that anymore. So you can't, most time you can't even go up front, loading in the airplane. So, just looking back on it, everything's different now.
Yeah.
Off that one event.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. And the young aviators that I'm going to be flying with someday, when we bring up 9/11 as a topic and what has changed, and a lot of them weren't born yet, or they were young like I was and didn't quite understand what was happening.
Another thing I was going to say real quick was, am I still on? Oh, here we go. Sorry. Was, Captain Elmore mentioned that, the security measures were really relaxed prior to 9/11. And, since then, he went through a little bit of the changes that have been made, very light, briefly. But I don't know about you guys, but, when I go to work, and I get on property, and maybe it's just me, and I'm not saying this because, we're talking about 9/11 or anything like that, but I'm always looking for, the odd thing, the thing that doesn't look right or doesn't look normal anymore. That 9/11 is always in the back of my mind. So when I come in, I'm looking for, like, why is that door open? In the secure area, is that supposed to be open, or why is that bag sitting in the middle of the terminal and there's nobody around it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you guys find yourself doing that?
Yeah. What we got from 9/11 was see something, say something, and that became the motto of an entire generation. We all have grown up, hearing this. And it definitely has changed the way we look at security, for sure. There was a naiveness to it before. But we have 5 more interviews to get to, and I'm really excited. Our next aviator is a friend of Squawk Ident. He has been a supporter of my efforts from the very beginning of this podcast. He is a well-respected Airbus captain at Legacy Airlines who currently holds a union leadership position as vice chairman of the Los Angeles domicile for Legacy Pilots Association. We look forward to having Captain Bill Evans join us soon on a future episode of the show to learn about his journey in aviation. He was gracious enough to speak with me about his experiences surrounding the events of the 11th of September of 2001. Here is the interview with Captain Bill Evans.
Yeah, my name's Bill Evans. I'm a captain on the Airbus for the Legacy carrier. I was hired back in '98. Before that, I flew for a regional. It was a small place. It was paying your dues, definitely. We looked up to companies like Sandpiper Air, where I came from. So just to get going here, I've been 23 years with a Legacy carrier and started about 3 years before 9/11.
Now, what do you recall, Bill, from those first moments when you heard about the attack?
Yeah, I was I was off that day, living in base, middle of the country, and my house phone rang. We didn't really have cell phones back then, so the house phone rang. I got out of bed early morning for Central Time Zone, and it was my mother on the phone. It's kind of weird. She didn't normally call me. And she goes, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Just got out of bed." "So you're home?" Yeah, I'm home. She goes, "Okay." I go, What's going on? You need something? What? No idea what's going on. She says, "You need to just turn on the TV." And of course, that started it right there. Just turning on the TV, seeing the sky, seeing the building. Only one plane had hit then, and immediately, I knew it wasn't an accident. I'd flown there every week for a year, back and forth, Midway, LaGuardia, long layovers in each town, and it was obvious there was no way that was an accident. So that was kind of how it wasn't kind of that is how I found out about it. Was just a call from a relative seeing if I was home, knowing that I travel to New York every week, multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you recall of that day?
Just how pretty, what a pretty day, back home where I was, it was a pretty day. Looking at the TV, you couldn't have a better fall day in New York. It was just a beautiful day. And knowing, just thinking about my trips and where I would normally be on a day like that, down in Manhattan, maybe the Brooklyn Bridge, just hang out, whatever you feel like doing. It just looked like a perfect day to go enjoy New York City. And anyway, we know how it ended up.
Yeah. And so how long did these, events of that day affect you and your family?
It affects us to this day. Well, I can think of several times over the years where I've broken down. You think you're way past it, and you're not. It's always there. It's always in the back of your head. You think back to what it was like beforehand. You used to, technology was limited, but we started carrying pagers. So if you're on reserve, your pager would go off and you pull it out, and then you felt pretty cool about it because you got a pager. You run to the payphone and call and see where you're going, that type of thing. The trips, I was flying the Fokker jet, a little less than 100 passengers. So we had 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants. We were paired together the whole sequences back then. It's hard to break a crew up. So you're real tight with your crews. You really got to know each other. The typical names for the Fokker, it's called the 4-day double date, or the Ken and Barbie jet. Just good times back then. Just you get that call on your pager, you show up at the airport, hop the employee bus, and it drops you off at a side door. You just go through the side door and you're in the terminal. No TSA. TSA didn't exist. It was local security firms that handled the security at the airports.
Yeah.
The TSA is all born from 9/11. So, looking back at that, and how does it affect you to this day? It affects all of us, whether we know it or not. It's there. You're familiar with just showing up for work now, what it's like. Nothing like it used to be. On the flights, the flight attendants would get done in the back, and they wouldn't have to call or anything. They just unlock the door and walk up with a extra plate full of shrimp cocktail and sit down and hang out for 10 or 20 minutes, talk and relax for a little bit. And then they go about what they're doing. The whole ship and everything having to do with our job and security, born from 9/11 is just immense when you really sit back and think about everything that you used to be able to do back then that you cannot do now.
Yeah.
Reading the names, you mentioned that earlier. That's a lot of names there. So we do have fellow pilot that his father was on one of the jets as a pilot. I had the honor of bumping into him about a month ago and talking with him a little bit. I can only imagine what he's going through. I wasn't flying that day. I did not have a relative involved, but going back to how does it affect you to this day? I could sit here, if I dwelled on it long enough, I'd probably be in tears again.
Yeah. Now it really truly was a pinprick to the heart of this industry. To see this happen, to have everything that has changed over the years come to fruition. We were talking with some fellow pilots recently, and they were mentioning, you remember when we would have children and people come up to the flight deck mid-flight at cruise when we're not busy, and they'd come up and they took take a look at the cockpit in awe and wonder, and we'd take a photo with them with their little point and shoot cameras, and it was just a different time. And like you mentioned, they just come in the door and bring coffee and treats. And after 9/11, things changed, I think, for the better in terms of security. We now have a bulletproof door that separates us from, the back of the firewall there. And things are so procedured out. We have procedures for everything. How we open the door, how we even use the restroom. We have procedures for that. And what other changes did you see that happened after the events of 9/11 that were not there before?
One thing that I was reflecting on right after 9/11 was, I guess, the next week, I'm flying my trips again up to the Northeast. And one thing, I just got to throw this out there because it makes me think about our country. Is I had a DC layover, and we were going Chicago to DC, coming down the Potomac River, and you're descending and following the river. And on the left, you got the Capitol building and the White House and all the monuments. And on the right, you have Arlington National Cemetery and the Pentagon. And again, this was before cell phones, with cameras and everything else. So I had my own little camera sitting there. I had it turned on. It had the little SD card. And I had it ready to go. So we're coming down the Potomac. And here comes the Pentagon. And it had the hole and it had the flag over the side. I grabbed my camera and I went to take a quick shot. And it said my SD card was full. And I thought back to the last picture I took. Was the flight attendants in the back before we left Chicago. Just, hey, here's our crew. That should have been the picture that I had for my keepsake. So anyway, we land and enjoy a layover, and we come back to the airport the next day. And again, it's not TSA yet. It's private security, and now we have a bunch of National Guardsmen running around the airport. They're all standing there at the security checkpoints with their rifles, and I get through security and grab my bag and go stand over with the National Guardsman, and the captain, he gets pulled aside for additional screening. When they grab his bag, throw it up on a little fold-out table there, I just start smiling. The more I watched it, the more I started smiling at this, and some of the National Guard guys, they started smiling too. But they took the captain's bag, put it up on the table, and a Muslim man with a turban that works in security, unzips his bag, and it's going through his bag in Washington, D.C., right after 9/11, going through the bag of an airline captain. And it just made me think about the diversity of this country and our ability as a society to accept, after what just happened, to accept people for really who they are and to be able to go through, come through stuff like that. So that doesn't really answer your question about procedural changes, but that's something that I've thought about off and on to this day is what a good country this is to be able to take all the different diversities and put it together and make this place what it is. and to be able to rely on each other.
Well, that definitely has gotten better over the years. And that is a testament of what we represent as Americans.
It is, and it's prevalent through our industry, and through the airline we work for. So, as far as security procedures, I think that's what you're asking me about. Half time, by the time we show up to work, now we're worn out. Everything that we've gone through to get there.
True.
I quite often say my favorite part of the airplane is the cockpit door. So once it's closed, we're there to do what we do good, what we do well, and we know how to do that. All the other stuff, all the passenger screening, all the screening we go through, all the fingerprinting we do, all the badging we do, everything we have to do just to show up and fly an airplane from point A to point B and do it well, really does take a toll on the crews. And it's now, you can see, especially you throw COVID in there now with all the mask requirements and everything else. Yeah. I'm a firm believer that that's just one more layer that's making people snap back there and act in ways that they shouldn't be. So the security, it'd be nice if we could back it off a little, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. How do you get it more in the background? I don't know.
How would you express the significance of 9/11 to a young aviator that was not old enough to really have experienced it firsthand 20 years ago?
I think it's ingrained in anybody coming up at that age now. There wasn't the day of hijackings where some guy says, well, I want to go to Cuba and get some money and try to run off, and live the rest of my life. That used to be what hijacking was. Now, that's not what it is. That's and I think in order to talk to somebody young like my son about that, who's in his early 20s, he would first have to know what hijacking was before, what the procedures were, what the history was on all these security situations, what it was like before, because they've never lived that. So I'm not so sure that there's something that I could tell somebody now that they haven't grown up living. If you never experienced anything different, then you first have to introduce them to that in order to show them how it changed. I had a challenge coin that our union made up for. I think you have.
Yeah, thank you.
For 9/11, and it has the 4 flights, United's flights and American's flights on the back. It has the memorial in Grapevine, Texas on there. And the other side has the Twin Towers and the flag. I came through TSA, going to work. And after I got through and I was not what we call random for extra screening, I pulled out one of these challenge coins and gave it to the young lady working the TSA security checkpoint for us. And I said, here, I want you to have this. And I went over it with her. And she looked at it, she goes, wow, this is really neat. I've never received anything like this before. And I said, well, I just want you to know how important your job is to the security of our industry. And I want you to have this and keep it and remember. And she said, wow, thanks, and as I'm getting ready to walk away, she goes, I was alive back then, but I don't remember 9/11. I was too young. So that's kind of where I was going with, hey, what do you tell young people? This is all they've lived. If you're 20, we're at 20 years now,
Yeah.
Even if you were 2, 3, 4 years old, you don't remember it. This is all you know.
Yeah. So it's up for us that were old enough back then, and those of us that were actually in the industry, in the airline industry at the time, that were directly affected in one way or another, to share that moment, that change. I mean, we all remember hearing stories from our parents where they were during the Kennedy assassination, from our parents where they were when we pulled out of Vietnam, where they were during the Martin Luther King assassination, where they were when the first man landed on the moon and walked on the moon. These are pivotal moments in our history, and 9/11 is no different. It's not just another day. It's not just another tick mark on the calendar. It's a day of remembrance for how on our soil the acts of a few led to the change to all. And it's important to remember that. And thank you for sharing your experience with us.
There it is.
There it is. This is a beautiful thing. I appreciate you handing me one of these. This is very important to me. It stays in my kit bag, and it will not leave my kit bag.
I carry one in my pocket every trip.
Yeah, for sure.
No, the only other thing I reflected on the last couple of days is having a layover in New York City. It was probably close to a year after 9/11, and it was a long layover. I brought my wife with me. Captain brought his wife with him, and we rode down to Ground Zero, which was still being dug out and cleaned up, debris removed. It was an incredible hole. It was, and this is from looking at platforms up, from buildings on the side. And I thought, you know what, let's walk down to the gate. So we walked down there, and they had a couple people there just discarding them. It's just a little barrier that they could move and get trucks in and out. And I said, hey, here's who we are, and just curious if somebody could take us in. No, you can't do that. All right. So we stood around a little bit, just looking from that vantage point. And a policeman walked up from inside. And he said, hey, I hear you're an airline crew. I said, yeah, we are. He took our IDs. He moved the barricade and took us in and walked us all the way down to the middle of it. And it looked even bigger from down there. It was overwhelming. And he said, right here, this marker, we found a bone fragment yesterday right here. It's been bagged, it's been tagged. We've got a marker. And one day DNA technology is going to be good enough to where we can identify who this is and let their next of kin know. And all four of us just broke down. It was just incredible thinking who that might have been, what they were doing that day, where they came from. And I don't know how the technology's come along, but I assume it's gotten better, and they're able to take these. He said there's just thousands of them. And
oh my God. Thank you for sharing that. That could only have been experienced.
You didn't expect it to hit you like that,
Yeah, right there at the moment. I mean,
yeah. Anyway.
I don't think there are many people in this world that have had that opportunity to be there during the cleanup, during the initial few months and even years leading up to the restoration and rebuilding of that memorial of Freedom Tower and the adjacent buildings. So the fact that you just by chance were there that day,
just by chance,
and that officer by chance overheard you and overrode that guard's duty and allowed you and your crew and your family, your wife to go down there, that is something that is just an awesome experience. And I am very grateful that you shared that with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we have a great career, great job, a great industry. We have fun doing it. Everybody does this because they love it. I can't think the last person I met that just does it. They don't like it, but they just do it for the money. But we have we're very lucky. And along with that comes a tremendous responsibility. When you go through your training from private pilot on up, however you get here, whether it's through the military or civilian route, but you go through that training. And I remember going from a little airplane. The first time I got to fly a twin, that was something, and then the next goal was to get in an airplane where I didn't crawl in the cockpit. I actually had to walk up an aisle to sit in the cockpit, But you go through this whole progression through your career. And then I went on to a regional and then on to a legacy. And along the way, you don't realize how exponentially your responsibility has grown. What you're responsible for. Every time we sit down in an airplane, we've got a couple $2 billion worth of liability on that airplane. And we're told every flight, you have 200 souls on board. It's not credit card applicants. It's not passengers. It's not this. It's not that. It's souls on board. And it's something, anybody that's young, one day I'm sitting there thinking about how did I get from there to here? And that, you don't think about that responsibility in the sense that, it's going to make you nervous and so on, but you accept it and you do it. And I don't want to say I take it for granted, but it's something that we ought to reflect on as crew members a lot more than I think we do consciously. I'll leave it there and let you edit it out because I don't know where I started with that. But we can't forget the responsibility that we have, and that goes back to security as well. That is a big part of it. But we are responsible for the payload that we take with us every trip.
Yeah. I often say and have said over the years that the gravity of our responsibilities starts when we don that uniform in the morning and those wings are pinned to our chest. That's when our responsibility begins, not when they close the cockpit door, not when the parking brake is released, but the moment we put those wings on our chest, whether that's at home or in a hotel room, wherever, that's where it begins, and it doesn't end until we take them off.
Yep.
And we should be acting accordingly.
We ought to be.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon with us.
Thank you, Tony.
I do appreciate all your recollections and the memories that you've shared with us very deeply. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So, gentlemen, Bill is a fantastic, very well-spoken individual. It was one of the most difficult interviews I've ever had the privilege to record.
It was wow.
Yeah, you can hear the emotion in his voice, and it's very, very obvious, how like everybody said, how much it changed him and his family and his career for forever. It just, and then hearing the story of him going to the ground zero and getting that personal tour with the security or the cop is just another level of personalization. It's amazing, man. I'm sure some people have some form of PTSD, one form or another from, everything that happened.
Yeah. It's stories like these that need to be told.
I think the biggest thing with 9/11, like Captain Evans was saying, was the whole country came together. Didn't matter where you came from, what you did, color, race, sex, you name it. Everybody came together and supported one another. And just looking back at what happened and going forward, security is a serious deal. Like we talked about earlier, it's hard to pinpoint problems or issues or just because everybody's different, just because, you come from that culture doesn't mean you're a bad person. Because it happens everywhere. And I think that that's the most difficult point out of 9/11 was those hijackers. That could be anybody. And you look at today with what's going on in the world, and you have all sorts of people doing all sorts of crazy things, and just got to be head of the security. And also for the young viewers, the term that we need to learn and continue to talk about is the new form of a hijacking, or a terrorist or whatnot. Because back when, like Captain Evans was saying, they were trained to, hey, okay, where do you want to go? We'll take you to Cuba, or take you to Central America, or we'll take you to South America.
Yeah.
We'll give you a big bag of cash.
We'll give you cash, and here you go. Yeah. That's what they were trained for. Nobody knew that these terrorists went and got some sort of flying lessons to get the aircraft off the ground, and they knew what they were doing. They had some sort of training, and then the ability to know the security measures already in place. Because I didn't know, and I'll be the first to admit it, I didn't know the TSA came into effect after 9/11. I thought it was that was part of the deal. I didn't know it was all private. So there's your first barrier that we talk about, the Swiss cheese model. Mm-hmm. And then, secondly, like Captain Evans was saying, those groups, the flight attendants, when it was time to eat, would come and just open the door.
Yeah.
So they, it had to be planned, because if I'm a paying customer and I'm riding the, first class or coach, I'd be scared to walk up to the door, even though if we could go in it, because you just don't know if you're allowed to do that. Is it safe? As a paying customer, with no aviation background, why would you do that in the first place? Yeah. So there's a lot of things that added up to it that you're just kind of curious and to see what the terrorist groups come up with and how they know, and what research do they do? Do they have a ghostwriter riding on planes? Yeah. Do they get it from somebody, prior to that? How long did that attack? How long did they plan it? How flying lessons for all the terrorists, how there's a lot of questions still, at least for me, since I was young when it happened, that you scratch your head when September 11th comes, because we're the US of A, we're the biggest, baddest country in the world, and why would that happen to us? Why you think that all these things would have been thought of and processed, and as we've talked about on previous episodes, FARs, for instance, everything's generally written in blood. So, a lot of it's head scratching. Is it a money thing for an improved door for airlines? Was the FAA not pushing for it? Where you never know.
Yeah, I think, and in some of the other interviews that we're going to be listening to, you're going to hear a little bit about that, how we were very naive, thinking that this could have happened a lot earlier. I mean, we
open
asked
society we have. It's
afterwards, we asked why. Yeah. And after we were done asking why, we were asking how. How could this happen? And that's when the changes started to roll into effect. We're going to talk about that, and we have many more interviews to go on this very special episode of Squawk Ident. And we'll be right back right after this break. Well, our next aviator was a recent guest that joined us on Flight 88, Managing Expectations. He has spent the last 3 decades weaving within almost every aspect of the aviation industry. He is a Texas sheep rancher, a glider instructor, a CFI, II, and MEI flight instructor with type ratings in the Citation Jet, the MD-80, the Boeing 737, 777, 787, and the DC-3. We are honored to have Legacy Airlines Captain Vic Barber join us with his insights on the events of 9/11 and how they have impacted the aviation industry.
Hi, I'm Vic Barber. I'm a captain at Legacy Airlines on the 737 based out of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, and I've been flying commercially for 37 years.
What do you recall of the moment you first found out about the events that happened on 9/11?
I was visiting my family in Anchorage, Alaska, and I got up that morning, and my aunt woke me up. She said, "Come in, you have to see this." So I got up and I went into the living room and watched the pictures. Straight back to the bedroom and on my knees, praying for our country and for our people. That's what I remember the most.
And how did the events of that day affect you and your family?
Well, like it affected all of us in the industry. There was fear and doubt, and it made us get a little closer to each other. We got closer. We went straight to our family, our church family. Everybody supported each other. With regards to, I didn't have children yet, and that would have changed things dramatically, I suppose. But it turns out the year anniversary of 9/11, we announced that we were having our first son. So it didn't take us long to recover into joy with him. So,
what was it like afterwards in the days and weeks following the event for you and your airline career? What was it like going back to work? Were you off work for a long time?
Well, actually, I don't recall being off for a terrific amount of time. We, of course, it happened that first day. We sat around and we watched and we moped and we sat around and my cousin was there. And we finally said, well, we're going to sit around here and wonder about what we can't do or what. And so we decided to go fishing. So we went on the Kenai River and went fly fishing for trout. And then we went down to the ocean and we went clam digging, and we fished went down towards Homer and fished for steelhead. And we just concentrated on something that we could do at the time. Because I was stuck. I was worried about my wife. She was out here at the ranch, so there really wasn't. She was really in good hands. I feel fortunate about that. We didn't have any children, which would made things much easier for me than for a lot of people who had children. And I was stuck up there until they started flying some airplanes, and I got out on. I don't even remember what airline I got out on. I think it was Delta, down to Seattle, and then I was able to get on Legacy to back home. And we were home for just a little while, and then we just started putting it together and flying again. That's what you do. You pick up and you press on.
Yeah.
And what changes did you see in the immediate days after you start flying again, if any?
Well, of course, there was the security. That was, that was all a big deal. And it's a petty thing, but I always had my Leatherman tool with me. If you see me and I'm not at the airport, I've got my Leatherman tool on my hip because I use it constantly. It's a tool, and I use it constantly. And I couldn't take my Leatherman tool flying anymore. And I couldn't even take fingernail clippers, let alone, my Leatherman tool. So the things I had taken for granted for so long were taken away now, and for arguably for cause. We all know that things went a little ridiculous. Fingernail clippers, seriously. Those are the biggest things. The encroachment on personal liberties. I see that as the biggest loss, and those don't really come back so much. If somebody generates a cause to take your liberties, it's really hard to get those back. So you have to fight for them when you can, as hard as you can.
And a lot of changes have happened in the industry since September 11th of 2001. A lot of it had to do with security. We had the invent of the TSA that didn't exist before 9/11. There was a time where you could walk your family to the gate and see them off and give them that final hug and kiss goodbye. And that all changed afterwards. We had flight deck doors that were now bulletproof reinforced materials. Those had to be manufactured and put in place on all the aircraft around the world. And things like tools and any kind of object that could be considered a weapon was now strictly removed from the environment through screening and security. And these changes didn't happen overnight. Many say that things are better security-wise now versus how they were then. Can you remember what it was like before all these security changes? And was it real? Is it really better now, or do you think that it's just different?
I think it's different. There may be there's some ways that it's better, and there's some ways that it's not better. In a lot of cases, I think it's eyewash. But there's some things that I'm really sad to not see anymore. The teary goodbyes, at the gate. And for that matter, I was flying when I was flying for Mustang Air. I flew a flight up to Portland, and a fella got on the airplane with a bunch of roses and a bunch of leaflets, and he coordinated with the flight attendants, and he said, when I get off the airplane in Portland, there's going to be a young lady there waiting for me at the gate. And I would like to give a bunch of these roses out to a bunch of passengers with this picture of her. And I'd like them to hand her the rose when they get off the airplane. And when I come out, I'm going to propose to her. And so I had to see this. The flight attendants told me about this. And so got up. And of course, all these people went off and they saw her. She was right near the gate. And they walked up to her and handed her a rose. And she had this whole great big bundle of roses when he finally came out, and I had made sure I got out there before he did because I wanted to see it. And he went out, got on his knee, and proposed to her. And you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
How would you express the significance of how 9/11 changed the industry to a young aviator that maybe was not old enough 20 years ago to have experienced it firsthand?
I'd take him out to the local airport, and we'd walk across the runway, and I'd show him the lights, and I'd show him everything that you can't do at a big airport. We'd go in, we'd go climb in my Champ, and we'd go take off without using a radio, and we'd go land in a grass field. And I think that'd be the best way to start off, just how it used to be. And the airlines were a little bit different. You couldn't walk out on the runway, but some places you could.
Yeah, I have a local airport by us. I take my daughter there occasionally to go get lunch and go sit there because there's no fence. You just park there and watch the airplanes come in and do their touch and goes, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great experience.
Yeah, I take my son. He just got his private pilot license. He'd been flying with me since he was just a couple of years old, and we go out to the airport. And he's off in college now. I just took him to college. And wow, if I talk about it too much, I'm going to get choked up because I miss him. But we go out and we climb in the airplane, we fly, and we come back, and it's a little airport, and there might be an airplane there on the ramp, but and there might be somebody else out there doing something in a hangar, but probably not. And we push the airplane back in the hangar, and we get our chairs and we go to the cooler and grab a drink, and we sit out there and we talk. We, say, enjoy our private country club out there. And we got to hang on to that for as long as we can.
Yeah. So GA is absolutely important to stay into. I know there's a lot of there are a lot of pilots that I've flown with over the years that have been in the airline industry for 20 plus, and don't have an airplane of their own, and they just haven't been in GA at all. They've done the airline career, and they don't have the luxury of going out to that small airport and sitting there and listening to instructors give some young 16-year-old their first flight lesson, and they don't see not unlike how we no longer see families and loved ones off at the gate. Now it's on the other side of security. It's not the same thing. We don't see that. It's the same when you're not involved in general aviation, at least here in the US. You don't get to see the passion and the smile from ear to ear when we're talking about airplanes. And that's something that is important to hang on to, because that freedom of the sky in a single engine piston, to be out there with just the wind noise and gliding
not
across,
having to talk to anybody. Yep.
That is what it's all about. And lest we forget that's the reason we got into this industry. Captain Barber had a very inspiring take on how we can't let the actions of a few on 9/11 change the way we look at the beauty and the freedom that we have and need to cherish. You can't take away all this freedom of flight. We got to make sure we fight for that and keep going, because if we change the way we operate to the point where we just can't do it anymore because of the acts of a few individuals with terrorist malice and just damaging actions towards our country, then they win.
Yep.
And
agree 100%.
Now, what stood out for you, Kyle, on this latest interview?
Walking up to the gate, pre 9/11, to wave goodbye to your loved ones or meeting a family member that you haven't seen in a while. And then the biggest takeaway for me, because I hadn't really thought about, was GA flying. Being able to walk across the runway, walk across the taxiway, being able to hang out at your little local airport, not having all this security around you that you're used to going to work. Is it going to affect GA flying at some point if another tragedy happens, where you take that away? I remember talking to late Frontier pilot Bob at our local airport. He started out in DC-3s with Frontier as an FO, and one thing he told me before he passed away was, "This is the flying you want to be doing." He said, you're gonna get that big airline job, you're gonna make way too much money, and you're gonna come out and you're gonna buy a couple toys and just realize this is why you got in it. This is why you're flying. You're having fun, not having to go through security, not having to deal with people telling you where to go. You just hop in your own airplane and you go. Don't have to talk to anybody. Land anywhere you want. Well, almost anywhere you want. $100 hamburger, flying to little cities to support the local communities. But that's fun flying. And to a lot of the young listeners, again, don't take that for granted, especially during your primary training. That's the fun flying. Just keep that in their back pocket and take it with you, and look back on that if you're having a bad day or whatnot. But yeah, that like you said, a little country club at the local GA, and if anything happens, is that going to be the next security area on the list that you're going to have to deal with going to fly GA?
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, I can't even imagine taking that away.
Yeah. And Rob, what impressed you most about, I mean, you were there with me when we interviewed Captain Barber. What impressed you most about what he had to say about remembering the events?
Well, the thing that really sticks out to me was his concern for his wife while he was in Alaska and things happened, and he was trying to get back home and just not knowing, how or when he was going to be able to do that because the airspace system was shut down. So, and I think, part of his, his mindset at that time also was, okay, terrorists just flew airplanes into a building. What's next? Are they going to, go to, I don't know, state capital and start blowing up, the state capitals and, schools, so, where was his mindset? And I think, just where's your family? What are they doing? Are they safe? And if they're not, how do we get them safe? So that had to be, just very, very, overwhelming for some people, just not knowing.
Yeah.
Is this the end of what's going to happen? Yeah, totally. I mean, that would worry me, having a family right now, if something like this were to happen and I was on the road, where are my kids? Where's my wife? Where's my parents, sisters? What's their status? Are they safe? That whole thing is just got to be just, that's got to be horrible.
That's part of
that stuff.
That's part of the career. I mean, I didn't really realize this when I got into it. I was too young and naive, but that's what you realize later on in life is everything that goes wrong is going to happen when you're away. And sometimes
definitely
you can't get back in a timely manner.
All the time.
All the time. My air conditioner just went out last Thursday. Well,
oh no.
Thank God I was home on that one, but I mean, shoot. Yeah. I had to, deal with that, but
yeah.
It always happens,
Always something, and your significant other just has to roll with the punches, and I think that's a big thing. Talking growing up was, and most civilians, neighbors, friends don't realize that when you're on the road, you're on the road. You got a water heater that broke, air conditioner that broke. If your significant other calls you, I mean, what are you going to do?
They need to be pretty
by
independent.
the time you get home, right? You got to be independent. And by the time you get home, either it needs to be fixed or, scheduled to get fixed or, something of that nature. And then on top of that, you're catching up on what you missed the last 4 days.
Yeah. It takes a strong partner to be married to an airline pilot. And if your partner is not in the industry, they learn quickly that when things happen and go wrong and you're not home, you have to have a good, strong, independent partner and a good support system. Now, the events of 9/11 really did, as Captain Barber was mentioning, bring the country kind of together. Well, another thing it did is it brought families together. Our next pilot that I have the privilege of speaking with this week has also graced us with his journey in aviation back on Flight 16. The journey and rise to Legacy Captain, exploring Old San Juan, and the end of the 2019 holiday travel season. I think that was the longest episode title that I ever wrote. That was just way too long. If you have not listened to Flight 16 yet, please make a note of it and give it a listen after this flight. With 3 decades of aviation experience and countless flight time in a range of aircraft from Cessnas, Duchesses, King Airs, Metroliners, MD-80s, 737s, 757s, 767s, MD-88s, and most recently, the A320 family of aircraft at Legacy Airlines, Captain Hans Fielsch joins us today as he explains how impactful the events of 9/11 were to him and his family.
Hi, my name is Hans Fielsch. I'm a captain at Legacy Airlines. I've been here since we were acquired in 98 and we transitioned in 99. I'm currently a captain in Los Angeles on the Airbus. I've been flying commercially for, do the math, 32 years. Yeah, 32 years. Wow.
Fantastic. First off, let me just say thank you so much for agreeing to allow me to interview today. We've had a fantastic time flying together in the past. We actually have done a podcast together. I remember we were in, was it Puerto Rico?
San Juan, Puerto Rico.
San Juan, yeah. We went for a run and we got some authentic food and we just had a blast. And then we went back to the hotel and recorded a podcast in person.
And then we had an earthquake.
And then we had an earthquake in the middle of the night.
Yes.
That's right. So, actually one of my favorite experiences on a layover. So I just, every time I think about it, I'm happy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, me too. It was a good layover.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I wanted to talk to you about today, through the realization that there's an entire generation out there of pilots and aviators, professional aviators at that, even out on the flight line at regionals, that have maybe were too young to remember the events of 9/11 that happened 20 years ago. They will only read about it in books or hear it secondhand. They don't know what the industry was like before those events, how everything changed. It's not just security, but the way we do business, the way people think about aviation. What do you recall of the first moment that you heard about the attacks on 9/11?
So I woke up on a layover in Atlanta and I turned my phone on and immediately knew something was wrong because I had something like 16 or 17 voice messages. And, clearly that was unusual. So I listened to the first one. It was my buddy who was a pilot at Southwest Airlines. And he said, Hans, I hope you're on the ground. Turn the TV on. You've got to watch what's going on. They're flying airplanes into buildings. And just like, what? Who's flying what into buildings? Doesn't make any sense. And so I'm like, all right, next message. And it was somebody else. Hans, I hope you're on the ground. I hope you're not one of those airplanes. And it's like, uh-oh, what's going on? So I didn't even bother to go past the second voice message. I turned the TV on and I turned it on perhaps, I'm thinking maybe 30 to 40 seconds, if my memory is right, before the second building was flown into.
Wow.
So, they were showing it and I thought, this is a misunderstanding. Somebody must have flown a turboprop or something into the building. I didn't really grasp what really was going on. And then I watched live with the rest of the nation when that second, when United flew into the second Twin Tower. Like everybody else, I just could not believe what I could not comprehend. I couldn't relate that was real. It just seemed like special effects or something.
Yeah.
And then, Tony, it was hard to understand. I think if I remember correctly, I was on the 74th floor on a high rise in the tallest building in downtown Atlanta, and I remember looking outside thinking, can you imagine an airplane coming into a building like that? It was just trying to grasp that. I was blown away. It gets a little nebulous from there because I called my fiance, and she was a flight attendant, and she was on the ground supposed to go flying. And, she's like, I've been trying to get a hold of you. The rest of the 15 messages were hers, and, just trying to make sense of what was going on. And ironically, I was on the 7.6 at the time. So seeing that airplane being flown that way was pretty close to home. And it was just, Tony, I got to say, I think for me personally, I have to say there was an innocence that I had, honestly, about our profession, our job, the things that we do. You know how much we love our airplanes and our toys. And to see them used like that was such a violation. It was beyond anything I can possibly ever try to put in words. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It absolutely, my world was completely changed, and it's never been the same. I have boycotted 9/11 every single year since. I have absolutely refused to watch any of the stuff that's on TV. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it. It's too raw. 20 years later, I can't believe it's been 20 years. 20 years later, it still absolutely blows me away. And it took me, at the time, we were doing a lot of Manhattan layovers. A lot of our flights were slash trips where we'd fly the red eye to New York, go to Manhattan, lay over, and then we would fly a day and a half later, we would fly an early morning flight back to the West Coast. And I remember a lot of our crews later on would take their IDs to Ground Zero and tour Ground Zero. And I can tell you categorically that for, I think it was 17 years, I never went south of like Soho. I just didn't.
Really?
Yep, absolutely. All my layovers, I absolutely refused. I did not want to go there. It was just such a sick feeling. Like I didn't want to be a tourist. I didn't want to have nothing to do with it. It was only about 4 years ago that I had a long layover in Manhattan, and we stay right there at Wall Street, literally 3 blocks from Ground Zero. And I finally went and I looked at it and kind of made a little bit of my peace with it. But, like this year, I know it's the 20th anniversary. I've told my family, I'm like, if any of that stuff comes on TV, just change the channel. I'm not interested. I don't want to watch it. It's too raw. 20 years later, I cannot watch it and not have that absolutely devastate me all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not alone in that. I've spoken with quite a few aviators over the past few weeks and months because this is the anniversary. And with everything that's going on in the world, it just seems like there's a generation that sees it as this enormous act that changed everything. But for those of us that were in the industry at the time, it really is a completely different feeling. It's completely different to us. And some people said, "Yeah, I was flying that day and I saw it, and I'm not going to let the acts of an extreme sector of a particular terrorist organization dictate how I think about the world and about people." And then there are those of us that it was so damaging to what we have a passion for, this industry that we protect. We protect this industry so much. And to hear you say that it affected you so much that even to this day, you would rather not relive that experience, because it's not just a documentary or a movie or a remembrance video for you. It's very real. You were flying. You were there, and I appreciate you telling us about that and sharing that with us.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you also, and it seems pretty clear after what you just expressed, that how long did these effects of the events of that day affect you and your family?
I don't know if I can answer that, Tony, because I don't know how to measure it. I mean, the immediate aftermath was pretty, it was pretty powerful. And, I'm sure people have gone through traumatic things that have affected them for the rest of their lives. I think for me, I was too naive, and I think it struck something that was so precious and it was so dear to me, you know, like, I mean, this is airplanes flying, something I have never not wanted to be associated with. So the fact that it was used the way it was and the aftermath, I don't know how to say it. It has never not been a factor. Like, I mean, talking to my sons, let me put it to you this way. I have two teenage kids, 17 and 15. And I remember that when they were in 4th or 5th grade, you know, one of their silly classmates or something mocked. We'd gone to like some kind of 9/11 something, and they had picked up a little mug, or I forget what it was. Oh, I don't know what it was. It was a sweatshirt. It was a 9/11 sweatshirt that one of them had, and one of the other kids, you know how kids are. You know, one of the kids said something pretty disparaging to him, which he didn't relate to me. And I remember just absolutely, like, I could feel me getting incensed. These are kids, you know, and I wasn't even there. I just heard it secondhand, but I could feel myself getting just really like, no, that's sacred ground. Like, you can mock other things. You can say disparaging things about other things, but don't go there. You know, that was just not an event that I can't make jokes about it. I can't laugh about it. I don't think anybody really should, but to me personally, it's too strong. The image is too strong. And you know, on a personal anecdote, I can tell you, because you're talking about how this affect your family. I mean, honestly, I mentioned the fact that it was my fiance. I can tell you, Tony, that, you know, it really did change my view of the world a little bit. And I realized, you know, sometimes things like this happen, and none of us that morning expected to see what events, you know, played out and how they affected us. Well, I had been with my girlfriend for a long time, and you know, like, you know, it was like, hey, are we going to get married? Well, you know, she was nice enough not to ask it, but it was in the air. And I got to tell you, you know, when you see something like this and you realize, you know, this could all be over anytime, you never really know. It kind of it literally kicked me over the fence where, you know, we got engaged and we got married, you know, just a few months afterwards. And it was because, you know, 9/11 was driving a lot of stuff where you go, you know,
life
try
is
to make
short.
sense out of this. Yeah, life's short. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually, thank you for sharing that. That's actually a positive that came out from a tragedy.
It is, and you know, but I will always associate the, you know, it was a link. There was that link to that dark day. You know, sure, something positive happened in my life, absolutely, no doubt about it. But it was not the way it was supposed to be. You know,
right.
I don't mean the marriage part. I'm talking the, you know,
right.
The
It shouldn't.
you know?
The fact that it took that to have you reassess life. I mean, that's a part of grief, right? That's one of the stages of grief, is the reevaluation, and after the depression, you reassess your life and you start making decisions based upon the reassessment. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
We were, her and I were just kind of waking up and not really doing anything one morning, and we got a phone call, and that was when the Airbus crashed in New York. And it was almost like a month or 6 weeks after 9/11. And the immediate, of course, nobody knew why did this Airbus crash, which later we found out there was other reasons for it. But it was immediately right back to 9/11, and oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
And I remember when I turned the TV on and watched that footage of that Airbus that crashed in New York, I remember my reaction was just, I don't know how to describe it, Tony. It was, you know, it was like way over the top, because I thought, here we go again. Like,
and was this the Hudson flight?
No, this was so it was an Airbus taking off, and I don't know if you remember the and I don't know how much of this you want to share, but the FO unfortunately did like a full reversal, full left to full right rudder, snapped the rudder off, and they went down.
Right. And thus came out the warning in every single aircraft operating handbook: full deflection of the rudder in one direction, followed by a full deflection of the rudder in the opposite direction, may cause structural damage. Yeah, that's from that event.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, in any aircraft accident, it takes a while for them to even like figure out, you know, what could have gone wrong.
Sure.
And of course, the immediate thing was, here we go in New York again. But something that was completely unrelated to a terror attack, and it was just this immediate sick sensation inside of me where I thought, oh no, this can't be happening again. I can't do this again. I don't know. I don't know how to say it in words, but it was very, very powerful for me.
Yeah. And so, you were flying for many years before this happened. And we've recently been talking with fellow aviators about what it was like before all the security changes, when they had private security at the airport, where you just kind of got like going to a concert. You got kind of, check your backpack and make sure you don't have anything that's contraband, really, weapons and things like that. And then, walk your family to the gate, give them a goodbye kiss when they were traveling to go see Nana for Christmas, and you got to see them off, and you waited there and waved until the airplane pushed off the gate, and
anybody that wanted to go could go through security.
Could go through. We had children visit us on the flight deck and say, "Oh yes, hi pilots." Oh yeah, and the captain would always take a moment and turn around, put down their coffee, and be like, "Oh, would you like to be a pilot someday? And here's some wings. And do you like gladiator movies?"
Yep.
And, all the things that we used to enjoy. Can you recall any of the other perks of the industry that were there before but are not anymore?
No, I don't know that I don't know that I can just off the top, recall a perk or something. I think probably for me the biggest loss was that innocence that will never come back. We'll never be able to reestablish something like that. And I think that is a collective thing. It's not just those of us that are in this industry, because now you've seen it's gone to everybody's workplace. Everybody has to have a badge to get past that locked door, and everybody, and that was not like that. I mean, it really wasn't. We didn't have to live in a world in which we were so paranoid that somebody was going to come into your workplace and, carry on. So I don't know about perks. I know that's what you're asking, but I think, honestly, I think what I missed the most is that incredible, I don't know, maybe kind of a silly naivety or something, that we had, because it had never happened before, not at that scale.
Yeah. Yeah, it did change quite a bit for all of us, really.
Yes.
Your flying experiences prior to 9/11, like your typical sequence, was it much different than it was afterwards?
No, I don't think so.
And it just took time to get back to speed. Since you were on a layover in the middle of this, how long were you stuck in Atlanta?
5 days.
5 days.
Yeah, I was there for 5 days. And what's interesting is, so we checked in this downtown hotel. I wish I could remember what it was. It was the Hyatt, or it was the, one of the big names. And it was a prestigious layover, tallest downtown building in Atlanta. Really nice. I remember looking out of the view. I could see for miles and miles and miles. What happened is the next day, everybody was sure that any high-rise building was a target. So there was a group of maybe 25, 30 flight attendants and maybe half as many pilots, where they basically organized themselves and went to the Super 8 motel in suburban Atlanta, 2-story buildings. They did not want to stay there anymore. So they organized it among themselves. And I guess I could have participated, but I didn't think anybody was going to fly into the building. It's not like I had wisdom. I'm doing the math thinking I'm not the only tall building here,
right.
It's a hotel. But what happened was it was very lonely. It after day one, when everybody vacated and businessmen went home because their meetings were canceled, downtown Atlanta was me, the captain that I was flying with, and 50 bums, street bums, it's the only people that were out in the street. And I remember on day 4, finally Macy's opened, and I was able to go into Macy's and buy socks and underwear, because I had only packed it was only supposed to be a 2-day trip out and back. And so on day 4, I'm like, well, I've run out of clean stuff. So I went to Macy's, and they finally opened that day, because everything was locked up in downtown Atlanta. It was insane. There was nobody there, no cars, no businesses, nothing. And it was kind of a lonely existence. It was like, you're just in the room watching bad, negative news all day long, wishing you could go home. So I finally got out of there. Remind me if my memory is correct, 9/11 was on a Monday, and I left. I'm fairly certain I left on Saturday.
Wow. And so you were able to fly out of there, go home. How long before you returned to work?
One day.
Oh, so almost right away.
Yep. If my memory serves me right, we flew from Atlanta to Dallas, and then we deadheaded back to the West Coast. The deadhead flight was literally 70% uniformed crew members. All of us were stuck in different places.
Yeah.
So I did fly one live leg from Atlanta to Dallas. We deadheaded to the West Coast, back home to our domiciles, and then I had a day off. And then I went. My next sequence, I'll never forget this. We went from the West Coast to Dallas, and then Dallas to Boston on a flight that took us literally. If you've done that arrival from Dallas flying into Boston, you go right over Manhattan, and we could see the smoke plume. So this is like, now a week later, we could see the smoke plume from there, from all the way from Washington, D.C., we could see it.
Wow.
And then we flew literally right over the top of Manhattan and began our descent into Boston, which to me was so weird. Like, it seemed like, wait, shouldn't they be not allowing the planes flying? Obviously, we were still at, 30-some thousand feet, but it was just so surreal. I remember who I was flying with. I remember the name of the crew that I was with. And I remember this like it was yesterday. It was just etched in my memory.
Yeah. Yeah. And was there any hesitation from the crew to fly after 9/11?
I think those of us that were flying can probably kind of relate a little bit to the COVID thing. Those who were unable because they had too many issues in their head and whatever, they didn't. They stayed home and called off, and they didn't. And those of us that were out there flying, clearly we were okay to whatever degree it was. I don't know how to say it. But everywhere you went, Tony, on that particular Boston flight, when we got back to the West Coast, they had a thing at the San Francisco airport where it was like a prayer thing right there at the gate. It was weird. It was organized because the two airlines that flew into the towers were in adjoining terminals, and they kind of said, we need some solidarity, and they did this little prayer group between the two terminals. And I remember attending there, and there was airline people from both of us there, holding hands, trying to show some solidarity. And I remember so many people. I mean, I think all of us were in tears. It was insane.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah.
This is exactly what I was hoping to hear from all you wonderful captains that have agreed to talk to me, because it's difficult to, you can understand the logistics of what happened, why it happened, although we'll never really know. What could go through a person's mind to the point to where they would execute something like this. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to just explain the finite details of what it was like for those that could never know. And unless you experienced it firsthand or you were involved directly, you can never know. I was a private pilot at the time, and just beginning to get my feet wet in this industry, getting ready to change careers. And I remember I was working a late shift the night before, and my wife was working an early morning shift the day of, and my phone rang at the house, and I thought, uh-oh, what's wrong? I'm, because she knows I'm be sleeping in. And she said, don't say anything, just turn on the TV. I gotta go. And she left and got off the phone, and I turned the TV on, and I stood there in front of the television for what must have been at least 4 hours. I didn't even put down the remote. I just sat there in shock. And to this day, it hits me hard. I may not have been an airline pilot at the time, but I felt just so much more connected to what was happening simply because of what I was embarking on, my passion that had started a year earlier. So I can relate to what you're saying, but the way you've expressed your experiences and what you went through and still go through to this day is something that is absolutely priceless. And I just want to say thank you for sharing those.
Of course, Tony. Happy to share with you.
Yes, thank you. Final question, and I think you're in a very good position to express this, having 2 teenage sons of your own. How do you express the significance of how 9/11 changed not just our industry, but the world to a young person or a young aviator that was just not old enough 20 years ago or not around?
Yeah, I don't know, Tony. I mean, look, my dad was 14 when World War II ended, and he's German. So it was, this isn't about right or wrong. This is just a fact. He was a German, lived in Germany, was 14 when the war ended. And he was always very reserved. He would share, but he always tried to, I think, shield us from what the atrocity really was like. And I've kind of thought about this a few times, like why? We're not talking about the same thing. One is a war and one was
an act of war.
Well, but it was a specific attack. It was just one attack. We didn't have to flee. We didn't have to, we didn't have our country demolished. So, but the fact that I could never grasp the gravity, I think, is part of it. Like, I don't think, like, he could tell me, but you're young, you're not really going to get it. And if you don't live it, you're certainly not going to get it. So I think when it comes to the kids, we've tried to sort of emphasize a little bit what it was, and especially tell them the significance of what it was, why it was so important to us, why planes that we flew and people that we worked with lost our lives that day, and our industry was never the same again. But it's like you said, if you weren't living it at the time, if you weren't old enough to grasp it, and they weren't even alive, you're gonna miss out on it. And that's okay too, because clearly it affected me a certain way, but it didn't affect all of us the same way. So, I try to tell them, look, this is a big deal to me. The world has really never been the same since. But I could also be slightly tainted in my in my filters and thinking, I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it really was, in terms of saying, things like this have happened in the world, big events that have changed the world, and they continue to happen.
Yeah. So maybe it's just in the expression of respect that we must maintain that can be an example for them. Yeah. Well, sir, I thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
My pleasure,
it has
Tony.
been absolutely enlightening to hear your story, and I'm just so grateful that you agreed to share it with us.
Happy to share with you, Tony. Always good to see you and talking to you, and good luck on your podcast, and hope we get to fly real soon.
Yes, we'll have to make a point to make that happen.
Okay, Tony.
Well, another fantastic opportunity to interview just a terrific person. Captain Fielsch is so passionate about what happened, and it's not hard to see the hurt that, we all felt that were around, but to see the hurt explained through his words and in his eyes, it really hit him hard as someone who is passionate for aviation. so much respect for him,
Yeah.
and I'm just so grateful that he was willing to share those words with us. Rob, what impressed you the most about what he had to say?
Well, I think one thing that really rung a bell with me was when he was talking about the gravity of the situation relative to his kids, and that how unless you were there, you really won't understand what the significance of the attacks had on the country and in the industry and everything like that. He also talked about when he was in Atlanta, and I think he said he was there for 5 days or so, but let's talk about the flight attendants had collectively got together and decided to go to a different hotel because it wasn't a high-rise building. They were, obviously thinking that, they were targeting high-rise buildings, and being at the hotel in Atlanta was a target in their minds, and that just shows me the amount of chaos, or the amount of uncertainty, or the amount of fear that the events played on individuals across the country, and to really just it like he said, it affects people in so many different ways, and unless you were really there, you really don't know how that a person is feeling about it, or how it affected them personally.
Yeah. And we'll be right back right after this break. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to some fantastic stories about the experiences that some of our captains over at Legacy Airlines went through when finding out the news that there were attacks against our country on September 11th, 2001. It's been 20 years since that day, and we here at Squawk Ident wanted to honor the memories and experiences of our fellow aviators by conducting some interviews and finding out what it was like to be out in the industry, in the airline industry at the time. Our next captain is no stranger to the podcast as well. We first introduced him on Flight 48, Airport Bums and Bonderanis. That is the episode where we found out how a cross-country flight at the age of 10 sparked a passion for aviation. From an AMP to an ATP, Captain Dave LeTourneau has honored me with a conversation about his experiences while on a layover in DCA this week. If you have not heard Flight 48, please take a note, jot it down, download it after this flight. It's a great story. Here are Captain Dave's accounts of the events that forever changed our industry.
I'm Dave LeTourneau. I'm a pilot for Legacy Airlines. I'm a captain on the Airbus A321, and I am a pilot that came from another airline. I worked at an airline that was bought up by Legacy Airlines, and I've been here since August of 99.
Yes.
And pushing 29,000 hours now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Yeah. That's great.
Just means I'm getting old.
Yeah, well, you're in good company. We're all getting old, Dave. Well, thank you for joining us today, first and foremost, Dave. And I do appreciate you agreeing to sit down with me today and talk a little bit about your experiences 20 years ago during 9/11. What do you recall of those first moments when you first found out about what was happening?
I was in Orange County, John Wayne, on an overnight. I'd flown in the day before on September 10th, and the entire crew was going through screening at John Wayne, and we were walking down towards the gate to do our return flight from John Wayne to DFW, and one of the flight attendants was walking alongside of me, and she said to me, "I heard that an airplane hit the World Trade Center just a little bit ago. How could something like that happen?" and kind of, rattled my brain for a minute. And I said, well, about the only thing that I could think of is maybe if the weather was really bad and a pilot got lost or disoriented and they were unable to establish where they were and they mistakenly ran into the building. And she stopped me and said, no, I hear it's a clear day out there. And I said, well, was it like a little Cessna or something? And she's like, no, I heard it was American Eagle. And I said, wow. I said, I don't know how that could happen. And so we continued walking towards the gate. And then at John Wayne Airport, we had to go downstairs outside of the building down into our operations area. And there was a TV on in the operations area. And it was tuned to a channel of some newscasters talking about this. And in the background, you could see one of the buildings burning. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, this is a real thing. That flight attendant, actually knew what she was talking about. And so it kind of paused and looked at it. And the newscaster didn't know much more than an airplane had been reported to have hit the World Trade Center. It was on fire. And while I was watching the TV, another airplane hit the Trade Center, and I didn't see that that's what had happened, but the newscasters saw it and they said it immediately. It's like, oh my God, it looks like another airplane has just hit the other Trade Center building. And then they replayed it, and then it was in the background behind them, and so you couldn't see it very well. But they replayed it again, and this time, you could see that an airplane had actually hit it again. And so I'm like, wow, something's going on. I don't really understand what's happening. But yeah, something's definitely going on in New York. And I believe that at that point, I proceeded out to the airplane and started to do my pre-flight duties. And I can't remember back then how we got our clearances, if we got them over the ACARS or if we had to call and get them from the controller directly. And I was on the fleet that the airplanes that were used to hit the Trade Center and the Pentagon. I was on the 757 that day, and I went into the cockpit and ended up calling the controller one way or another, saying, I can't get my clearance. And he says there's a ground stop for all departures, and check back in a while and we'll see what's happening. He said, any idea how long it's going to go on? And he says, I have no idea. Says maybe in an hour or two. Says you can call me again and you can maybe get your clearance. I remember talking to the captain a little bit, like, have you heard what's going on? Did you see the TV downstairs? And he says, yeah, I saw. He says, this isn't going to be a normal day. Yeah, I have a feeling you're right. And then I probably checked back with the controller after 45 minutes to an hour, like, any updates? And he says, no. He says, I've never seen anything like this before. He says, the radar scope is clear. Every airplane in the country is being told to land and no departures are being allowed. And right about then, a Cherokee came on the radio and he was looking for his clearance to go up to Burbank. And so then I heard the controller tell him, it's like, no, he says, there's a ground stop. Nobody's being allowed to depart. Have you heard what's happened? And the Cherokee pilot responded, yeah, but I don't understand how that affects me. That's out in New York. Yeah, he says, nobody's being allowed to take off. He says, I suggest you go back and shut down. And I know that guy was frustrated because he didn't understand why it affected him out here on the West Coast, but we all eventually learned. So that was kind of how, I learned of what was going on. And I just went back into ops and started watching the TV some more to learn more what I could. Probably this was pretty early in the morning. So I think that it happened about 8:45 in New York, and it was 5:45 on the West Coast. I think we probably had a 7 a.m. departure planned. And by 10:30, I was back on the hotel van going back to the hotel. And there were a couple of United pilots in the van with us as well. Maybe it may have been Southwest pilots. I can't remember. Doesn't matter. But I remember talking to them a little bit about it, and they were, obviously blown away as well. And I'm probably jumping around a little bit. We went back to our hotel, and they allowed us to check back in. And, the people at the front desk were, had these, concerned look on our face, like, are you guys going to be okay? And I remember later on in the day, a letter was slipped under our door in our hotel room from the manager of the hotel saying, if there's anything that we can do for you, our heartfelt sympathies go out to you and your company, because it was your airplanes that were used in this attack. And if there's anything we can do, be sure to let us know. And it was like, wow, this is, that's right. This is my company. I do remember talking to the pilot saying it was these particular flight numbers. And like, does that mean anything to you, that these two flight numbers were used? And that was when one of the pilots said to me, no, the flight numbers don't mean anything, but it's 911, 911, like the emergency call. And that was the first time that I had heard somebody use that term, 911. Like, oh, wow, I didn't even put that together in my head yet, that it was, an emergency phone number that you would call to report an emergency. And today's date is 911.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was a shock for everyone in the country and around the world. And I think it meant a lot more to all the pilots and flight attendants and crew members and employees of the airlines, especially those of the airlines that were directly affected. And it took some time for that initial shock to kind of fade into what the reality of the situation was. I mean, as the country sat in front of their televisions, we all sat there just trying to grasp at answers. How long did you end up at the hotel?
I checked in the hotel originally on the 10th and we left on the 14th. And, I was based in Dallas at the time. I was living there in the Fort Worth area. And so I couldn't go home. But I had been based in the Bay Area earlier and with my former airline. And there were a lot of pilots and flight attendants that lived in the Los Angeles area that I was friends with, that they would commute up to the San Francisco Bay Area when I was working for my previous airline. We didn't have a base in LA with that airline. And so I called a couple of those friends and, one of them invited me. He says, I'll come and get you, come stay at my place. And so I went down to his place and spent the night there. I think not the first night, but the second night, because we didn't know when we were going to go back to work. And I told him, I said, when I get called to go back, you're going to have to drive me back. I said, no problem. He says, I'm not doing anything either. I'm one of our pilots and obviously I'm not going to be flying a trip right away. And so I went and spent some time with him. And, we were all just glued to the TV for the next, 96 hours, really. I remember, though, that first night watching the TV and, there was footage of the airplanes actually hitting the building. And I remember saying to myself, this is absolutely unbleepingly unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, to watch the footage is like, my God. And yeah, it was very unreal, surreal, what's the right word, to believe that had happened. And, it was sometime later, that I was able to figure out what the IN numbers of the aircraft were. And so then I went and looked at my logbook and it's like, wow, the 7.6 that hit the Trade Center, I had flown that airplane about 6 months before that had happened. And the one that hit the Pentagon, I'd flown it about 30 days before it happened.
Wow.
So, it's like, man, this is really close to home for me personally. It's like, I just flew that plane the other day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can only imagine, what was going through your mind, even to the effect of, we're all human and you kind of stop and think, man, that could have been me.
Oh, yeah. Because I knew you and I were going to be doing this, I looked at some of the stuff about the particular flights on Wikipedia today. And I had mistakenly thought it was another one of our captains that Muhammad Atta had approached in Boston. It was one of our female first officers on the 7.6 at the time. And I got it mixed up with one of the people that's in LA now. But I was reading about that he had approached her and said, are you going to be flying this airplane back out? And she said, no, I just brought it in. And then he turned around and left. But I remember thinking, it's like, that person is like, I was one flight removed from this happening. And for her, she's got to be like, wow. And then I also read about how some famous people were supposed to be on that flight that, changed their plans at the last minute. The one that stuck out most to me was Mark Wahlberg.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was supposed to be on Flight 11 from Boston to LA, and he had changed his plans at the last minute. This is according to Wikipedia, is what I was reading.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I spoke with one of your Mustang Air coworkers yesterday, and we have a wonderful interview with Hans that we just recorded, and he had mentioned the very story off the air about the female FO that actually, once the realization of what had happened hit her, and the realization that that was in fact the aircraft that she had brought in, and then weeks or days after the news came out, she found out that Mohammed Atta was in fact the passenger that was, at the time, she thought innocently asking her about, is it a good airplane? Are you flying it back out? And, as we do every day with customers,
Sure.
They come, some nervous customers before the flight still to this day will poke their head into the flight deck and say, oh, I'm a nervous flyer. Is everything okay with the aircraft? I just want to, see the faces of the pilots that are in command. And it's difficult for passengers knowing that they're not in control. Unlike in a vehicle or in a...
Oh, it's hard for me when I'm sitting in the back knowing I'm not in control.
Yeah. So
who is this guy?
And then that affected her. And maybe someday in the future, we can have the privilege of speaking with her in regards to her journey in aviation. And it affected her for years before she can come back to the line. As you can imagine, knowing that you were so close to the events and to the perpetrators of the events.
Yeah. Personal contact.
Yeah. I can only imagine, and hearing that, I just have nothing but sympathy for her to have gone through that. So thank you for mentioning that. That's there are those of us that have been affected. Most of us in the country can say we've been affected, that were around at the time. Those of us in the industry, I think, were affected a little more so. And then there are those in the industry that paid the ultimate sacrifice and were victims, and we know their names, and we have vowed here, at least at Squawk Ident, to remember them always. Thus the reason for this show. Sure. I wanted also to ask you, the events of that day affected all of us. How did it affect you and your family in the days to come?
I was married at the time. When I called my wife, she had no clue that anything had happened. And I said, maybe you should turn on the TV. I'm going to be stuck here in Orange County for a couple of days. She's like, well, what's going on? I said, well, a couple of planes were hijacked and flown into buildings. And so then she had told me that when she got to work, everybody was concerned for her because they knew that she was married to a Legacy Airlines pilot, and that she should go home. And she's like, well, he's not at home. He's stuck in Orange County. I might as well just stay here and be at work. Probably the biggest thing that affected me and all of us in the industry was just career stagnation. And, the airline industry imploded on itself because of all of this. The people that worked in revenue accounting will tell you that it was already coming. And it was really the internet to blame. It wasn't 9/11, but 9/11 was the straw that broke the camel's back and made it happen a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So, directly after it happened, I probably wasn't affected all that much. Immediately, it's not like I knew anyone personally right away. I did eventually figure out that the captain of the United airplane that crashed in Shanksville, that I had met him a couple of different times, Jason Dahl. He flew the same airplane that I did when I was flying charters for a Cessna dealer in Fresno. And I would see his name in the SESCOM, the logbook that went with the aircraft. And I met him once or twice, and I saw his name flash on the TV, and I called a friend of mine saying, hey, don't we know the captain of that United flight? And he's like, well, what do you mean? Who is it? I said, Jason Dahl. And he's like, oh my God. He says, he was the nicest guy in the world. I didn't know that was him. So that's what it says on TV when they were flashing the names of the crew on there. I just saw that name.
Yeah.
And, that was, in the late 80s that I knew that name. And he had obviously left and gone to, Brand X to fly for them. And that's, where he wound up. And that was his fate.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it really is telling. And the more I have spent time over the past few weeks speaking with pilots that were in the industry, a lot of the captains I've flown with, they all have a very similar experience in that somehow, in some way, they knew someone or knew of someone, or they felt the impact of the industry. For as far back as I can remember, I have been saying that this is a very small industry. Never burn a bridge. You would think that with all the pilots in the United States and around the world that, sometimes you fly with someone and you'll never fly with them again. However, it's a small industry and we're all connected through our passion for aviation. And when a tragic event like this happens, somehow we're connected. More than just the fact that we fly airplanes, but the fact that we're connected through our community. Now, tell us a little bit about how the flying was before 9/11. A lot of the young aviators today never knew an airport before TSA. I mean, there was security, but it was contract. They didn't know the experience of not just dropping off a family member on the curb, but walking them to the gate and sitting there for an hour before the flight and then watching the airplane push back and wave as your family was going on vacation or on a trip. And,
that's very true.
What else can you remember about the time before security measures were?
Well, I remember as a kid that you could go to the gate without even going through screening before the hijacking started to happen. And so, and that was in the early 70s. I remember taking my dad to the airport in Stockton, and we just walked with him right to the gate. And I don't think anybody went through any kind of screening. They just didn't exist. But before I went on an airplane, I'm pretty sure that I had to go through screening. It happened because of all of the hijackings that started to happen in the early 70s. But it was, like you were saying, contracted. And I remember at Orange County, when I came to work finally to fly the airplane on the 14th, that it was still the same screening personnel, the same people that I recognized, because I did a lot of flying out of Orange County. And it's like, oh, I know her. I recognize him. And I'm pretty sure it was Globe was the name of the company that provided the screening at John Wayne. And they had, a maroon colored jacket that said Globe on their label there. And I remember thinking, how is security going to be any different today? They're going to open my bag and go through everything looking for something. And then it wasn't any different than the day I come to work on the 10th. And I was like, oh, well, this is kind of the same. But it didn't take long for it to change. Within a short period of time, we had the Department of Homeland Security and we had the TSA. And it took the TSA a little while to ramp up, but it did. And, it was very different then. And then the biggest thing, and they had done this on occasions before, but nobody was allowed to go to the gate unless you had a ticket for a flight.
Yeah.
And in some airports, even me as a crew member, I can't go unless I'm on the NS as a deadheading crew member, or if I have a
boarding card,
a non-revenue type ticket, a boarding coupon. They won't let you in there. Fresno comes to mind because that's where my folks are. And it's like, well, my folks are getting on this flight and I should be able to just flash my ID badge and go through screening and go. And they're like, no, if you're not getting on the plane, you're not going into the screening area.
Okay.
Well, that's different. So yeah, you've probably already talked about that with other people that, screening is definitely different as far as who gets to go through these days.
So, we saw many changes after the events. We had like orange threat levels, yellow threat levels. That lasted a few
I
years.
forgot about that.
We had everything from nail files to fingernail clippers that were being confiscated. No more Leatherman tools for the pilots. A lot of pilots carried around a little pocket tool of some kind or a Swiss Army knife or something. That was gone. I can remember them taking away my cutlery going through TSA in New York, and they're like, "You can't have these." It's like, well, I got them from the first class meal that I just received on my previous flight. So if you want to compensate them, go ahead, because I'll just grab another pair. And they didn't like it when I said that. So a lot of things have changed from the protocols that we use, all our security sensitive information that we are required to know about, from going to the bathroom. And Hans was mentioning before 9/11, if you needed the bathroom, you would just say, all right, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Okay, go. And, they didn't have any swapping of, flight attendants coming up and going back and forth. All that was enhanced security measures.
That's very true. The way that we go to the bathroom, where the flight attendants would just come into the cockpit unannounced. They had a key to the cockpit and the door would open and they were in there.
Yeah.
And of course, that is completely different. Like you were saying, to go to the bathroom, you just get up and go, and you had your own key and you open the cockpit door and you came back in. The cutlery thing, I remember that. It's like, it seemed weird to non-rev in first class and you were served your meal with plastic spoon and fork and knife. And it's like, wow, plastic, huh?
Yeah.
One of the things that I do remember that was very specific was coming into Washington, D.C. If you're going to be landing at National Airport or Ronald Reagan Airport, I don't remember if it was called Reagan then, you had to have a code word when you had to use that when you checked in with Potomac Approach. And if you didn't say it, they would come back and they wouldn't say, what's your code word? They would just say, flight so-and-so, say again. Oh, yeah. So in addition to saying the ATIS, you would say the code word.
Yeah.
And then it was okay. Now we're willing to talk to you.
Right.
I'd forgotten about that. And that didn't go on for too long. That was maybe 6 months of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I definitely remember, and it's pretty much still the same way to this day, is no general aviation flights are allowed into National Airport. No business jets were allowed. No Cherokees, nothing. Nobody except airlines were allowed to go into there. And occasionally I'll see a business jet parked on the ramp there, but it's probably, something to do with government.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember for a long time we had that whole no one could get out of their seat for 30 minutes prior to landing.
Yeah.
We had to make an
That's
announcement.
Right. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. 30 minutes prior to landing, the captain would have to make a PA saying, ladies and gentlemen, you have to remain in your seats from this point on. Anyone that comes out of their seat is considered a threat, and then we'll have to hold and then get escorted. So, yeah, it was a kind of a big deal. I remember, and I used to think, that's pretty strict. And why is it only there, only in those airports there in the DC area?
Really worried about Washington, DC.
Yeah. Now, we've lost so many Americans and people of all nations, really. Almost 3,000 people lost their lives on 9/11. We had our first responders running up the stairwells as the buildings had collapsed. We had lost flight crew members that were murdered in their seats in an effort to use these aircraft as weapons. And this had never really happened before in this manner. And a lot of times when I speak with pilots, especially those that were flying during that time, they say it was an awful tragedy, but the nation woke up from their naivety or the naivete. America was naive. The industry was naive to think that something like this couldn't happen. And it took some radicals to wake us all up. And we've all changed, and we've all continued to look at security as a major step for the future in this industry, especially. Do you think that naivete still exists in this industry?
Not nearly to the extent that it did before. That's very true that, America was a sleeping giant. And now, we've been awoken and we're pissed off and mad and we're going to flex our might. I think today, I don't think we're naive as much as we are complacent.
Very well said. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so every day, the little things that we kind of do our job day in, day out, and we get kind of comfortable with it. But yeah, there are times when all of us get a little complacent with our security.
Just, that something doesn't happen and you're spring loaded, for so long, and then nothing happens and you spring loaded, and then, eventually what's the point? I know that's how people think. And, that's what the enemy is waiting for, is for us to be exactly like that.
Yeah.
So, we've all flown with the guide that to this day, he's still spring loaded and ready to fight the battle. God bless those people. We all need to be more like them. And then some people, just aren't as, cautious as they need to be.
Yeah.
It's real easy to open the cockpit door without looking through the viewfinder, but I make myself do it every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And all it takes is one time. So we should never forget the severity of what happened that day. Part of the reason I wanted to interview so many of you wonderful aviators that were in the industry active during that time was because I wanted to ask you specifically, how can you or we express the significance of what 9/11 means to a young person who has a passion for aviation, that is maybe even in the industry, even flying for a regional in their early 20s, that was just too young to understand the gravity of the events that unfolded? How can you explain to them what the significance of 9/11 is?
I think every generation grasps with that question when something significant happens. I'm sure that people who were around when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, struggle with that. It's like, you don't understand, you weren't there. World War I people, the Great War. It's like, that generation, you don't understand, what happened. So I think every generation that goes through a big event like that, struggles with that question, like, how do we, make the young people who weren't there understand what happened? And it's really encouraging those people to study history and to try to help them realize that something like this could happen again. And as far as, how you do it, I'm probably not the right guy to ask. I don't really know how you make somebody understand who wasn't there, other than, showing them the history and encouraging them to watch the TV when specials come on, because it's 20 years. And it's like, hey, we should watch this together. And here's my opinion as to what happened that day. And somebody who's genuinely interested and wants to learn will watch the TV show and ask you the questions like, what was happening to you that day? What was your experience? And, sharing that with that person is probably the best that you can offer.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And that's really in part what we're doing here today. And I just want to say thank you for joining us, for agreeing to be on, or allowing me to speak with you today. I know we're both on layovers, flying out there on the flight line, and we should be getting our rest and maybe having a cold one to relax and, and start
there's still time for that,
the day fresh. Yes, for sure. So again, thank you for joining us, Dave. I absolutely appreciate it. I appreciate you, and good luck out there.
Well, thanks, man. Appreciate you being interested in my story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, gentlemen, another fantastic example of the insight from somebody who was there. What blew me away was when he said, yeah, I flew one of those N numbers just weeks earlier.
Yeah.
It goes back to what we were saying earlier. It could have been him. It could have been anybody that was flying.
Could have been anybody.
Yeah.
The biggest goosebumps I got out of his story, Tony, was when Mohammed or whoever the terrorist was talking to the first officer getting off the airplane, how the airplane was and how the weather was that day, just shooting the conversation there about, taking the plane out, and, that could have been her. That could have been, and then the actor.
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg was supposed to be on that flight 11. Changed his ticket. So you just
that's crazy.
You never know. It just gives you goosebumps talking about it.
Yeah. And Rob, what stood out the most for you with Captain LeTourneau's interview?
Actually, it was very, very similar thing that Kyle just said. Can you hear me? By the way, I had to switch out my earplug. Yeah, it's a very similar thing that Kyle just said when that first officer had the interaction with the ultimately, as we know, would be the terrorist Mohammed. It basically was a very similar situation with me at my initial flight school. I think I remember telling you guys in an earlier podcast that I trained at Sawyer School of Aviation at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, learning training to get my private. And Hani Hanjour, who was one of the terrorists that flew into the Pentagon, was training at that facility. And there's actually video that I have seen of me entering the building and Hanjour walking past me and exiting the building. And obviously, if I would have known at that time what this guy was about to do, it would have been a different story. But, for quite a while, I was like, man, that was one of the guys, obviously it was a group of them that took a group of those guys to do what they did. But, it only takes one, kind of like our threat and error management thing. It only takes one, to spoil the chain of events. And, it could have been me to say, hey, that guy didn't look right. What's up with him? But, at the time it was very, normal. We just passed each other, and, I don't remember if I looked him in the eye and gave him a head nod as a, one aviator to the other aviator saying hi or whatever. But,
I think
I don't even I can't even call him an aviator, but you know what I mean?
I think the biggest one for me, Rob, that stuck out was when one of them was training down in Florida. And I believe it was Florida, and he wasn't interested in landing. To me, that would be a red flag.
Yeah.
But,
that's what they,
go up to chain of command there at the flight school. Hey, this guy, I'm teaching him how to land. He has no interest in doing that. What,
my flight instructor actually gave this guy flying lessons in the simulator, and that's all he was interested in doing was flying the simulator. And, he didn't have any interest in taking off and landing. And the FBI actually interviewed my flight instructor, and that's what he told him. He's like, once or twice a week, they'd come in for an hour or two, and we'd fly the simulator around. And
if you would have told me in the year 2000 that people would fly airplanes into, 100-story buildings, I'd say
they would have laughed at you.
No, it's not possible. It's not possible. So like you said, Rob, it's who would have known, And I really got to say thank you to Captain LeTourneau for expressing some of those thoughts and what was going through his mind during the events. It's chilling to hear that, that you were so close, within minutes of each other. If the schedule was just a little bit different, who knows? She could have been, that FO could have been the one in the airplane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Our final guest today is a new friend to me and to the podcast. He and I first met just a few days ago as we started our latest trip sequence together. It was one of the nicest 3-day trips I have had in a while. And as we got to know each other on the flight deck, I found myself intrigued about his involvement in defending our nation. He is a U.S. Air Force veteran with 28 years of service as an instructor, evaluator, and safety officer on the KC-135. He has also amassed 30 years at Legacy Airlines, both as a flight engineer on the Boeing 727 and 747, and a pilot with type ratings on the Boeing 757, the 767, and the DC-9. And currently, he is a captain on the A320. Captain Pete Lindner joins us to give us a first-hand account of the events of the morning of September 11th, 2001, from the runways at McGuire Air Force Base in Wrightstown, New Jersey. Here is that conversation.
Hey, hello everybody. My name's Pete Lindner. I've been 30 years now with Legacy Carrier. I'm an Airbus 320 captain right now, flying with Tony this particular weekend. Based out of LA now, was out in New York for 20 years, which I happened to be at during the events of 9/11 back in 2001, as well as a 767 FO. So I also served in the Air National Guard for a total of 28 years, 25 plus flying the KC-135. And that's kind of the story I'm going to talk to you about today and what events that transpired on my 9/11. Everybody has a great 9/11 story. It's amazing to the people you talk to, and it's so vivid. It's that cutoff point in time that people separate one half of their life and the other half of their lives. So that's kind of where I start, is with the Air National Guard that day. But
And let me just say, on behalf of all of us here at Squawk Ident, thank you, sir, for your service.
it's my honor to be talking to you about it today. Thanks.
Yeah, and what I wanted to ask you was, what do you recall of the moment you first found out about the events that happened on September 11th?
The initial thought was disbelief. I was on the first airplane crash, and I can tell you what I was doing. I was actually flying an instructor flight in the KC-135. I was teaching. It happened to be our vice wing commander. I was checking him out on the airplane, and we were supposed to take off about 9:30. And if you recall, things started kicking off around 9 o'clock. So we were just about done with pre-flight, getting ready to start engines, when the first plane hit the tower, and we got a note from our air traffic controlling agency at the guard base in New Jersey, where I was stationed at. And they said, "Why don't you guys hold off for a second? We're having trouble with your flight plan through New York airspace." Okay. So we sit there. And then we get a call from our supervisor of flying, who says, "Oh my gosh, there's been a second crash. First one we thought was an accident, second one not. Stand by." So that's kind of where that day began. I do remember, on a personal note, walking out the door that very morning at 5:30 in the morning, getting ready to go in to fly with the Guard. And it was just such a beautiful day, Tony. It was calm winds, clear skies, perfect temperature. It was just a perfect day. And I remember stopping and going, "Wow, this is cool." So anyway, after that, so that was the first time I was aware that something happened. Then the supervisor of flying, the SOF, called us back up in about 9:40ish, and said, "Come on in, we got work for you guys." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So the time that I really noticed something was when we got into our little tiny bread van, which is how we travel in style in the Air Force, and we swing around the corner to the squadron, and there's a Humvee with 18-year-olds with machine guns and guarding our squadron. I'm like, that's different. And we have valets now? This is cool. So it turns out they shut down the whole base and brought in the guards to protect us, as we were now possible wartime assets. So that's how I first found out about it. Then as I walked into the building, of course, everybody's congregating in the TV room, and you could see it going on.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine. Here you were getting ready to go out on a sortie.
Just a day. I was earning money that day. It was more headhunter money. It's coming in to do your job, to go to work. It wasn't a day meant to protect America or do anything else. It's just a day to fly and make some money. And it turned into a lot more than that. So
yeah, and I can only imagine. We've spoken with pilots that were flying the line or were just coming off of a trip, and it was a huge change that happened almost instantaneously, and the tone of the country changed, I think, and you were a part of protecting it. And I mean, I can only imagine the confusion that was going through not just your mind, but all the members of the squadron. Like, what the heck's going on? Was there a lot of that?
Yeah, it was actually a fairly undermanned day. I think it was a Tuesday. I'm not sure, but I think it was like a Tuesday. So we didn't have a lot of people in. And it was just everybody in shock. All of us hanging out in that TV room going, wow, this is serious. And, on a personal and a selfish point of view, I'm thinking, oh my God, I just gotten back from furlough in 1997. This is now 4 years later, and I'm seeing an attack against not only our country, but our airline. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how is this country going to continue? How is our airline going to continue? And that, again, is from a selfish point, not counting all the people that were directly affected by it.
Yeah. Yeah, nearly 3,000 lives lost that day. 4 airliners destroyed from these acts of terrorism that we had never seen at this level on our soil before. What happened after, the moments after you've learned what had been going on and you were in the TV room watching it? What happened right after?
Well, things happened pretty quickly from there. So in our military world, our primary job was to be able to generate for nuclear alert. And that's KC-135s are pretty important in the nuclear triad in that they can extend the force. They can refuel the B-1s, the B-52s, as they continue their mission across the pond somewhere to drop their bombs. So that was kind of our whole role. And we had a minimum of probably 4 to 5 hours to get our aircraft up and running. And to do so is a whole set of checklists. It is quite an extensive thing, from fueling the plane to max fuel loads, to getting the engines into a quick start configuration, to putting blinds in front of all the windows so that the nuclear flash wouldn't blind anybody inside. We had other equipment too, that Blizzard goggles to protect from a nuclear flash. Even an eye patch was kind of the last line of defense, to keep at least one eye available in the event that there's incomings. Now, that's different from what we expected on 9/11, but we still had to prepare the aircraft to that level. So that's what we did, and we did it in record time, literally like less than 2 hours. Everybody was motivated, the fuelers, the maintenance folks, the pilots, the ground crews. Everybody had everything up and running. We have a whole box of secret information which has codes, routes to fly for many, many different contingencies. So they can even change the mission mid-flight. And so you've got everything in these boxes, and our security people, our intelligence people had to come up with those boxes and have them all ready to roll. So it was quite the operation. And we worked as a team on a base-wide level, from the guys that were guarding our shack with the guns all the way to the guys that were preparing the secrets to us who were pre-flight in an airplane. So we had it up and running in just a 2-hour period. And we were brought out to this shack. It was basically probably a condemned trailer of some sort near the runway's edge, near our plane. And they put guard dogs and guards all around us. And that's where we sat. And we watched the rest of 9/11 Day portray itself out. And that's kind of where we sat up till we were eating MREs, meals ready to eat. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's like 2,000 calories in a bag. Tastes good. So that's what we were eating. And in the meantime, also going on right now is a total recall for the base. They're calling every pilot, every maintenance guy. Guardsmen are typically part-timers, and they work anywhere from 2 days a month to 15 days a month. And so they have to be on call on a short notice, and they give them 3 days to reply and get in. So everybody now is converging or preparing to converge without aviation. So they could be stuck in Arizona, say, on a trip. Some of the pilots, they had to figure out a way to get across country in a matter of 3 days. So it took time without being able to travel by air. As you remember, the airlines were shut down basically for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that stood. And then, as I was going to say, the interesting thing to me is at 9 o'clock that night, we got a launch message. We're like, what? We're going to go to a nuclear war of some sort. And it was like, wow. It was pretty powerful.
Yeah. And I remember you telling me when we were talking earlier today that you actually ended up in that shack for, 4 days?
Yeah, 3 days, with one pair of underwear. Probably your viewers don't want to hear this. No toothbrush until the second night, and we had nothing. We got ourselves on duty, and while they're waiting for the slow recall of everybody cross country, eventually somebody came to us and got us some food for the second night, as well as toothbrushes. And I think I did get a pair of some type of fancy underwear as a joke from one of our buddy pilots that was playing jokes on us. But I still have the pair of underwear, by the way. Again, something that people don't need to edit, cut.
That's great. That's good.
Any case, so that's
I
the
thought
funny
that was
part.
very interesting when you told me that you, because you would think that, okay, you got 8-hour shift and then you get to leave and you get replaced by your replacement. No, you were there for days.
Yeah, days. And just on a side personal note, that morning I left, this is back in 2001, where we had giant brick cell phones that were not flips or not your Apples. And so I went out with like 2 bars that day thinking, all I have to do is call my wife and ask her what she wants on the way home from work. I'll be fine. Needless to say, by the time I talked to my parents and my sister, let them know I was okay, my cell phone was dead. So friends and family that tried to call ended up talking to my wife, unfortunately. And I couldn't talk to her. We were in a trailer with walkie-talkies waiting for the order to go. So anyways, I said we did get a launch order. We went out. It's one time only that I ever in my 28-year career actually cracked open real sealed coded books, the real thing. We always have practice books and training books, but these were the real deal. And we're like, holy smokes, what are we doing? So they backed us down, though, about literally 10, 15 minutes later. We just started, I think, maybe one engine of our 4 engines when we got the coded message to back down. And we came back in. We shut everything down, brought the codes all back in, and they said, go get some sleep. We're probably going to go in about 4 or 5 hours. And we're like, oh, yeah, I'll be able to sleep.
Yeah.
So that was just 5 more hours of sitting around, nervous, waiting what to do. It was a long day at that point. Now we're talking, 3 or 4 in the morning. Nothing happened. So I'm glad that things normalized, that we didn't just do a knee-jerk reaction and drop bombs for the sake of dropping bombs. If there had been a good target, I'm sure it would have been worthy. But I was happy to see that it didn't. And finally, my replacements came on day 3. They were able to stand us down, put a new crew on.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting 3 days. It was also a very quiet 3 days. I don't know if you recall, with no airplanes in the sky, you hear birds, you hear nothing. It's dead quiet.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah. And that's the first time since the dawn of aviation and the last time that we have had 0 flights in the air for an extended period of time in this country and around the world. And it's never happened since. It's
That's a great point.
an amazing tactical and an amazing protocol that was set in place, that was happening real time, that really the contingencies for this kind of a global event to happen was talked about in theory, but this is actually happening in real life. We had not a single radar trace in the sky. And that, I think, spoke volumes for the weeks to follow. I know we got back in the air within about 4 or 5 days.
Right.
They slowly started bringing back essential airline service and military service in the air, and then slowly started bringing back flight training and GA stuff in the weeks to come. But it was a slow trickle back to the air.
Right. Yes. And I will also agree that another strange thing or moment for me, because we were based at McGuire Air Force Base, which is central New Jersey, maybe 60 miles as the crow flies from New York City. And we could actually see the smoke, obviously, from the Twin Towers. And that was eerie, too, to be sitting out there on the porch of that trailer and seeing the smoke just billowing out.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine to be so close to it, and to be reminded constantly just by looking outside.
If I may diverge, you can cut this out at another time, but once we did get up and running and we started flying CAPs, combat air patrols, over New York City and over Washington. And so it was being so close to that area, that was a common place for us to go up for 6 hours. Well, eventually, New York erected some towers of light. I don't know if you recall
Yes.
that, for the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, due to whatever plotting that the Central Command had, that was our orbit point.
Oh,
So if somebody had actually looked up for 6 hours at a time, we'd be orbiting right through those buildings. I thought the message was horrendous, if anybody saw that. But that is just the way it was. We did that as an emotional point for us, is to make the center, the epicenter of New York City, to be our orbit point. And I think a side effect was to see us flying through the light towers. It might have been an eerie effect if somebody had noticed it. I don't think anybody did.
I've never read about that. So, yeah. Now, the events of that day obviously has played an effect on you and your family in the months and years that followed. How long did it take for those events to kind of allow you all to feel normal again?
Well, it's still with me. That's for sure. That's definitely my cutoff point. Pre 9/11, post 9/11. My 3 children all went in the military, all 3 active duty. A daughter in the Navy, a son in the Army, and another son in the Air Force. So they all kind of were motivated by that whole turn of events. They were born in the early 90s, and I think they saw what I was going through, because I did get activated, and I did. In fact, just 2 months after 9/11, I was out sleeping in a tent in the desert with my 8 best friends in 120-degree heat and flying combat missions every day over Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So it was.
So you were in the thick of it.
It got to be a part, and I was proud and honored to be a part of it, and to help do our part. What little part we could do to help for not only the security, but to get back at the people that were in charge of this and had done this. In fact, I think I may have mentioned earlier that to you that I had actually flown the tail number of the aircraft that flew into the Pentagon. It was a 757 with the nose number of 5 BP. So we were all permitted to sign the bombs on the B-1 bombers at our base. So we were based out in the desert, and I had signed and had pictures of me with it, but I put the tail numbers of the aircraft that were used in the attack as well. And hopefully, in some small way, it vindicated it. It made me feel better. But it's good to be able to do that.
Yeah, get to participate in that way. Now, what changes? You were flying both in the airline industry and for Legacy Airlines, and you were a reservist that was activated. So you have both the military and civilian side experience behind you. Tell us a little bit how you remember flying experiences out on the airlines before 9/11 and how they dramatically changed after.
Yeah. Well, a couple things come to mind. The security aspect being probably the primary one. It used to be if you had a passenger acting up, the junior officer on the flight deck, which was pretty much always me, had to go back and reason with somebody who's angry and, screaming, yelling. Once 9/11 came along, that didn't happen anymore. There were rules that you either crossed the line and you were kicked off the plane, or other passengers would subdue you if required. It wasn't up to the lowly first officer to walk back there with his hat on and try and talk sense into a drunken individual. So that kind of was a big factor. The security was surprisingly naive prior to 9/11. I mean, everybody had a key to the cockpit. All the flight attendants did. You could just leave at any given time. If there was a 2-man flight crew and somebody had to go back and relieve themselves, they would just get up and go. And leaving just one person alone in the flight deck, and they didn't block off any corridors leading up to the restrooms. We were low fruit on the tree that day, unfortunately, and that did change, and I think that is a good change. And I don't think you're going to see that type of attack again, a hijacking. At least I hope not, but I think there's some great deterrences in place right now to prevent that. So those were the big changes. I think, funnily enough, when a flight attendant used to call up before 9/11, like a Pavlov dog, my stomach would growl, because that usually meant they had food. I'm thinking, it's time to eat. Nowadays, when a flight attendant calls, it's the same Pavlov experience, except I have to go to the bathroom, because the only time they ever come up is when we have to go to relieve ourselves at the restroom, and they bring somebody else up there. So those are small ways it's changed, but I think we're a better business now and a safer business, the way we take seriously our security at this point.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. The one thing I missed, and I don't know if anyone's mentioned this to you, is I miss when I was a kid, mid-flight, a flight attendant would come up and grab me and say, "You want to go say hi to the captain?" And mid-flight, they'd take me into the cockpit, and I'd sit there in awe and just look at all the buttons and the lights, and the pilots would turn around and go, "Oh, hi, what's your name? You think you want to fly one day? Do you like model airplanes? Have you ever seen a grown man naked?" I mean, the typical questions that you would ask, and really was a big factor in why I had a passion for aviation, is because of those young age.
And now you love
flying.
gladiator movies, right?
Yeah, I absolutely love gladiator movies. And that just, it doesn't happen, not even during the boarding process. It just is so rare to have a young person come up, and
it's a lot more sterile.
A lot more. And luckily, things did get a little bit better for a while, and now this current condition that we're in with this pandemic recovery, it's very few and far between where we have a visitor on the flight deck before the flight or after the flight, but absolutely welcome them every time. That's one thing I miss, is that and maybe it was naive to have that procedure available to us, but I really do miss that time where you could do that. It felt more like a privilege to fly, and that was it made it feel more special.
Right.
And now it just feels like it's you're on the bus, and there's a security door there, and it's a bulletproof door, and don't go near the door.
Right.
So times have definitely changed.
I do think that people feel more comfortable if they do get to talk to you and meet you ahead of time. I know we get to pick our surgeons when we have any minor procedures done. We get to pick our doctors. We get to pick a lot of things. You do not get to pick the pilots that are working your trip that day. So you don't know what you're getting. They're all very well trained. I will say that to get to that level, they've been vetted and they've been through a lot of filters. So I don't think you're going to get a bad pilot for the most part. However, it is comforting for somebody sitting in the back who doesn't have control over what's going to happen that day to be able to at least put a face and maybe meet a personality who's behind the screen door there, and who's going to fly the plane.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. So the whole purpose of us diving into these interviews with an attempt to understand the first-hand accounts to what happened 20 years ago. We've been asking aviators that I've flown with in the past, or that have been on the podcast in the past, to give us a little bit of insight. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. Part of the inspiration to do this show was the fact that I realized that it's been 20 years, and there are pilots out on the flight line right now that are working on their private instrument commercial ratings that are in their late teens, early 20s. There are pilots flying for regional carriers right now, flying a jet and a 121 operator that are in their early 20s that probably weren't able to understand the gravity of what was happening. They don't remember. And this is why I wanted to ask firsthand accounts. What would you tell a young aviator that is just starting out in the industry, this new generation of aviator that wasn't there 20 years ago or not able to experience it firsthand? What would you tell them about the significance of what happened on 9/11?
It was a day that I think the U.S. changed forever from being relatively naive. We didn't think we'd be struck on our own shores. We didn't think we'd be struck in such a horrific manner, as it turned out. Honestly, I have to say I'm a little disappointed at the way the country reacted. Nobody flew on airplanes. Nobody did things, and our whole industry took a major, major dive as a result of that. I think after I came back from multiple trips out towards Afghanistan to work with the Guard during multiple activations over the next year, people would come up to me and say, God, I wish I could do that too. I wish I could strike back at these people. And I'm thinking, you can. Take your family to Disneyland. Get on an airplane. Show them that you're not afraid, because that's what they wanted us to be, is afraid. And in that sense, they succeeded. And we could have all had played a hand in stopping that from being a successful part of their mission if we had all just went about business as normal, got back on planes, and went through those growing pains together as a country. I get it. Would I want to take my family on a plane immediately after? Well, I'm glad that the security procedures are in effect right now. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But that would have been a way we could have sent a message, I think, as a whole. In terms of the aviation thing, if I can throw a plug out for the Air National Guard, it is a great place to start if you are looking to build a career in flying. They'll take you through pilot training. You'll get to meet guys from all kinds of different airlines once you get on board with a Guard unit. It's a great camaraderie. And we got to take part in something real historical. It was very magical looking back, to sleep in a tent in the desert, sleep for 10 hours, get up and fly for 12, sleep for 10, get up and fly for 12. You had a purpose, and it was really very gratifying. It was probably one of the best things in my entire flying career of 35 or 30. I guess I'm getting older than I thought. Almost 40 years now. So anyway, just throwing a plug out for the Guard.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will put a link in the show notes for the Air National Guard, and people can take a look and get more information about that as well. Well, Pete, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today. This is a very, very special show for us. And, your experience when we flew together this morning for the first time meeting each other out of Ontario, California, and we did a trip Ontario to Dallas and then Dallas to Las Vegas, where we are now.
And Tony had a better landing than me, darn it.
Well, even a blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. But, just to hear your story, and I was telling you a little bit about what I'm working on, and I'm just so grateful that.
Thank you. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I'm honored that you're interested in my humble portion of that story. So
absolutely.
Thanks.
Well, it's fantastic to have had the opportunity to speak with some of these just wonderful, wonderful aviators. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank all of you for coming along on this very special journey with us. Please share this podcast online and with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe or follow the Squawk Ident podcast wherever you are listening. We also love listener feedback. You can send us audio feedback and comments via our website at www.aviatortony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, Romeo Tango, Oscar November Yankee.com. And there you'll find audio archives, photos from the flight line, our Squawk Ident pilot shop, and the guest book photo tab. You can also contribute to the show financially right from the homepage. Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram users can find us under the Squawk Ident podcast. I would also like to thank our guests today. To Captain Elmore, Captain Evans, Captain Barber, Captain Fielsch, Captain LeTourneau, and Captain Lindner, thank you for sharing your personal experiences with us. I am incredibly moved by your collective generosity and service to this industry. We shall never forget the tragedies created by a few radical terrorists. If we have learned anything, it is that complacency to safety and security has no place in our industry. Also, a big thank you to Rob D. and Kyle J. for joining me today, and a big thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, and take care of each other. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
See you next time.